I got in trouble one time for. I remember that. I remember that.
You tried to flip around the docket?
Well, no, because it's on YouTube, right? If somebody's looking.
We're live, Madam Chair.
Okay, we're live. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Inuit, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Cynthia Stevens, and I'll be chairing the hearing today. With me from the Board of Revision is Mr. Ian Mann and Mr. Brent McIntyre. Our assessor today is Mr. Jeremy Pohl, and our secretary is Mr. Jaswinder Kumar. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's orders. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the Board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 1 through 9 on our docket today. Mr. Kumar, please affirm the assessor and the applicants.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Jeremy Reinhold.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Concisely. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Rod Slaughter.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Please sit.
Thank you. Mr. Slaughter, just before we proceed, there's a few items on the agenda that also have liability to taxation listed as well as assessed value, and I'm just confirming whether you are appealing any of that today?
No, I'm not presenting on any of that, Madam Chair.
Okay, so I just wanted to confirm. I thought maybe it just was an error on the
It may have been. I'm trying to think now if there was a reason, but if there was, I'm not presenting on anything, and perhaps we can just on that issue.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And in looking at the agenda, it looks at item number, I'm just getting my numbers correct here. Sorry, I'm just grabbing my agenda. Item number 5 on the agenda appears to be the tower building at 360 Portage Avenue. And assuming that may take a bit more time today, I'm proposing that perhaps we hear that first, if that's if everyone agrees to that.
Makes sense for us. Thank you.
And Mr. Pohl, you're fine?
Yeah, that'd be my.
Okay, and panel members?
Yeah, that's makes sense. Sure.
Okay, so we will proceed then with item 5 on the agenda. Roll number ending in 800, 360 Portage Avenue. Mr. Pohl, please proceed when you're ready.
Sure. Roll number is 1209755780. The civic address is 360 Portage. The 2023 assessment is for 138,467,000. It's grantable for liability in class at 60. So this is the hydro tower. We're all aware of it.
Mr. Pohl, I'm just going to stop you. I just want to clarify. You said 467, but I think you just transposed the numbers there. It's 476,000.
Sorry, 476.
Thank you. Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Apologize. So it's a hydro tower downtown. It's a multi-story building, state of the art. I'll go through a good synopsis of what it is, just so we're reflective of what's there. On page 3 is straight from the Hydro's website, gives a good definition of what's there. It's LEED Platinum, the only one in Canada. I'll kind of stop here for a moment. It's won multiple awards. It has numerous studies on it. It is deemed, loosely deemed, the most efficient building and sustainable building in Canada. It's been awarded as one of the best buildings in the Americas. It's basically a how-to for a very high-end building. This is beyond anything in the marketplace. So I'll go through the reference to the material just quickly so we kind of get a good grasp of it. So highlighted in for convenience, it costs about 283 million. Costs from about 2007 to 2009 to construct. Again, it was a multifaceted engineering project. The write-up is on it as you care to read. I'm not going to read through everything today. It is approximately 70% more efficient than any other building as far as occupancy or cost to occupy the building. It's geothermal. Essentially, they're cooling the building as on the coldest days in the winter. They're cooling the building because it's so efficient. So I read through a lot of the studies on it. I'm not going to go through them all. I put a lot of links in if you want to look at it. But generally speaking, this is the most state-of-the-art building that you're going to see in the country. So as we go through, there's a little bit of write-up on page 7. Well, on page 6 gives a little bit of schematic of what's actually in the building. Air quality is there is no better building. Basically, essentially, this building has a skin wrapped around it. They channel air through it. They cool. They have atriums of open air. It has the best air quality of any building to date that I'm aware of in this country. Anyways, it is just a marvel of what can be done. So if we go through to page, starting on page 14, it is the site, obviously 360 Portage. As you can see, when we go through the pictures run to page 43. You can just take a quick look through them at your leisure if you like. It basically shows the building itself, the exterior. It shows it at night. It shows it as far as how the air flow can come in from the outside in with timed ventilation. Grass areas, sustainability, environmental components were all of it in this building. They had an objective when they went through it. Clearly, they're a utility company, and they wanted a property that reflects that, obviously. So as we go through the building, this highlights the quality of the finish of the building. It is spectacular. I went through Mr. Slaughter for some area issues a couple years back, where we had to take out some of the area that we had because we had to take out the vertical penetrations and mechanical spaces. So there's a couple of floors up top that had to be moved, as well as in the vertical penetrations. The areas were reviewed and we are creating the areas. So as we went through the building, we only went through a select handful of floors. There's obviously it's large building, but as you can see from the pictures, gives a good indication of what's there as far as office and quality of finish and all the rest of it. So starting on page 45, it's a bit of facts for the building. These are just straight off different constructors, trades who were involved with the building and write us on what they did. On page 47, again, it shows that it's highly efficient, one of a kind for its build. It's won numerous awards as we go through on page 49. Write-ups if you'd like to read through it. So highlighted on page 51, Manitoba Hydro unique building envelope enabled it to meet all of the goals identified as the project charter, result in the most sustainable, energy efficient office tower in North America. So I'm not really going to get through much more of the performance of the building. It is what it is. I don't think it was a question today. It's quite a marvel of what they built. So on page 53 is the IE. What they submitted. They have one IE, obviously they're owner occupied. They do have some tenanted areas where we will see in the other appeals. Those are on the other roll numbers are 4 tenanted areas that may become tenanted areas. So on page 54 is a continuation of the IE, and then of course the COVID questionnaire on page 55 and 56. So with that, I'll get to the actual workup of the building. So you turn to page 9. This is the heated parking structure. Originally there was supposed to be more, but they had a higher water table, so they can only put in 101 stalls. We have it at our model rate of $103.50 a square foot. That gives us and that's net obviously, and that gives us net operating income of $187,542. Capped at 7% gives us $2,679,000. Obviously, that's a small portion to what the major building is. So on the next page, on page 10, is the work for building. It's pretty straightforward. 570,592 square feet. I overrode the rent and I put it to $19.75 based on the information I had while I did the reviews of the marketplace for the OFAs and OFBs. I'll get to that in a moment. For that $19.75, it produces a potential rent of $10,222 for $10,222,442. And then our standard parameters would apply to that at vacancy at 10%, non-recoverable expenses at 3%, shortfall at $15, and overall capitalization rate of 6% gives us $135,797,000. On the next page is the 2 income streams summary. So that gets us back to the 1,038,476,000. So from that, I'll go to the marketplace study, which I prepared. Just back to. So we turn to page 62 is the start of the marketplace study. I did 2 marketplace studies on the OFBs and OFA property type classes that encompassed over 4 million square feet of inventory over 6 years. So we took a long look at how the market is, what the market parameters are, rent, vacancy, shortfall, non-recoverable expenses, all of which has been looked at. It's been a little difficult to present given the time constraints that we have at appeal. So I originally tried to go away from putting any commentary in. I do have the commentary now. I'll read through it, given that I don't think any panel members heard it yet. So I'll go through it in full now quickly, and I'll get on to the study. This is for the OFA marketplace summary. This is my commentary. You'll be seeing this moving forward in cycles to come. These two studies were done in a way that they will be vetted through whatever modeling comes, whatever assessed values come from our modelers, and then through the studies, and then making sure that they're fair and equitable. So, the summary of this is the OFA marketplace study's main purpose is to ensure fair and equitable assessments for the property type classes. In this case here, Class A. The study is also being used for appeal defense purposes for the Board Division of the 2023 reassessment. The study sourced from a 6-year review of every OFA property that operated on a net rent basis. The study encompasses 6 OFAs. There are 6 that rent. There's obviously some owner-occupied ones that don't, so that's not included in the study. The study encompasses 6 OFA properties, 257 commercial rentable units, and over 2 million square feet of leasable inventory. The study examines individual OFA properties and the global marketplace and cross-references it against outside sources in terms of owner advertised leasing activities. All parameters in the study are isolated to individual years and relationship to each other, and that's key, that's critical as we go through the years. Your rent, your vacancy, your costs are all in line each year. So they're all associated with each other, so in relation to each other. So to ensure proper and accurate year-by-year analysis of the marketplace for assessment purposes, the study yields the best, most complete market evidence to determine assessments on a fee simple basis. So again, we're not looking at contract rent, we're looking at what the marketplace is. We're looking at what the marketplace would be on a fee simple basis, meaning if the buildings were vacant, what on that reference date, what would they lease up at? What would be the vacancy rates associated with it? What would be the costs associated with it for that as well. So getting into a bit more of what the study is, averages, weighted averages, and medians are used to ensure that derived values are not distorted by smaller data set sizes or outlying data. Generally employing all three metric yields better understanding of the analyzed data set. Stabilization. The 2018 to 2020 years are stabilized to ensure older income and expense information, which may not be at market or limited from the analysis. 3-year stabilized review allows for proper establishment of individual and marketplace parameters and limits any distortion caused by potential outlying data. What I did was I looked at obviously 6 years, but instead of using just the 1 year, the last year of the reference date, I looked at it in a reasonable way where if we were going to the municipal board, I'd be stabilizing if it's 3 years of the economic window. It is 3 years. So when I'm looking at this, these are investment grade properties. You should be looking at it more than just 1 year. You should be looking at the breadth of years leading up to it and making a determination what market value should be based on that. So given the profile of these properties, I don't think 1 year was enough. So I went back and I stabilized 3. So exclusion of the partial 2021 year. This has come up in appeal. I just made my commentary on it. The delivery date of the 2023 property assessment roll is June 3rd, 2022. And this date did not allow for inclusion of income and expense data for the partial 2021 year, which is January to March, approaching the reference date, as it's not available to the assessor until May 5th, 2022. And further time would be needed to review, properly review and include any return data. As well, this 3-month block of data has limited availability and utility within the marketplace approaching the April 1st reference date, as opposed to the established 36 months prior to it. Furthermore, directive guidance from the municipal board also indicates that complete years with income and expense items in relationship to each other should be examined. Given the above rationale, the assessor has not examined or included its partial 2020 year for the studies or the May 4th year will be. The quote that I'm quoting from the board order that I'm quoting from is municipal board A18 478 478. It is the tax multifamily tax issue where you can sort of make out what the taxes would be just post reference, or do they get all the information to kind of calculate what it might be, should be. The board said no to that, it was post reference, but most importantly in that order, they made it clear that all line items should be looked at in relation to each other. Meaning, if you're going to try and jump to the next year for taxes that would have been going up, then why are you not looking at the next year for rent or expenses or anything? So realistically, you should be looking at each year individually to themselves. So the board spoke pretty well on that. And I think it was a very good order that, in my opinion, it was less on post reference and more or less keeping income and expense items in line for each year. So for the rent, and I'm going to pause here for a moment because there was a bit of an issue last hearing, and I just wanted to clarify. Wordage in this document has changed a little bit. I've updated it. The rent used shown or consists of new leases and step-ups in an individual year. I want to make sure and clear to the panel that we're looking at new leases that are in place, and we're also catching any step-ups. So if there's any change in rent, meaning any step-ups, we're catching that in that year. This whole study is a reflection of what's in place in a given year for that rent. So if we had a rent that started in 2013 and it was X amount of dollars, it's not looked at. But if it was a newly started at 2015, we're looking at that, and any other year of new leases we'd be looking at, but we're also looking at step ups wherever the step ups are changing and increasing. We're also catching those step ups as well. And that's important. I think that I think it's clear now, but I want to make sure that's clear to the panel that we're looking at the rents that are in place, reflective of what the market is in the individual years. So as we go along, maximum and minimum asking rents are achieved. Maximum and minimum asking and achieved rents are also examined to ensure outlier data, usually below market level due to tenant inducements, are identified to minimize the distortive effects on assessing purposes. For assessment purposes, the assessor is satisfied that through proper use of the study that the outlier rents have minimal impact on the marketplace results. So again, the next order, and there's multiple orders, I just chose this one. The municipal order A97-280 basically states that there is no tenant inducements that will use or TIs that we use to affect market value. And that's why I'm reviewing and taking in the step ups the way that they are. Usually if you have a long-term anchor tenant, long-term tenant, you'll get a step up in the first block of your term. There may be some, the tenant pays for some of the improvements, there'll be a deduction in rent, maybe a free tenant or a free rent inducement, something or other to get them in the building. As time goes on, those TIs erode and they go back to market. So as we go along in the study, we're catching those step ups. And if you use the study properly, those tenant inducements, which are inherent, there's still some in the study, are minimized as we carry along. So that's the emphasis of how I constructed the studies. And into the actual numerics of it, the 2020 global marketplace average rent is $18.69. The weighted average is $19.94, and the median rent is $18.90. The 2020 minimum rent is $14, and the maximum is $24.45. The 2018 to 2020 stabilized global market average rent is $18.69 a square foot. The weighted average is $19.21 a square foot, and the median rent is $18. The 2018 to 2020 stabilized rent data is further examined using standardized bell curve with the empirical rural standard deviation of 68%, 95%, and 99.7%. So 3 standards of deviations to produce a near perfect normal distribution pattern. And I'll get to that in a moment on the next page, or when we get to actual vertical charts. Little bit of change of wordage here. Instead of putting in new leases here, to put in new leases and step ups. So I wanted to make clear that it's new leases and step ups reflective of the rents that are in place in that year. So wherever you see new leases, just keep that in mind. I corrected any commentary from before, just so we're all clear. Of the 152 new leases or step ups in place that are 93 are within one standard deviation between 17, 22 and 21, 20, or 16% of the marketplace. So if you go to the next page, in green, between the 2 orange lines, that's your one standard deviation. Typically in any statistical analysis, that's your mean of your market right there. When you go beyond that, which is the next block, which is 43 or the leases that are in place are within 2 standard deviations, which is between $15.23 and $17.21. And then on the opposite side, $23.19 and $24.50, or 27% of the marketplace. That would be your next standard deviations out. So underneath in yellow, showing the rents that are reflected there. So again, you're now a significant amount away from the average, the weighted average, and you're into your second deviation range. And then 16 are outside of that, 2 standards of deviations past the 95% confidence interval, past $15.22 and over the 23.20. So that would be in red. And again, those are more extreme ends. And I'll kind of stop on that for a moment. We have one with a at 311 Portage, which is newer buildings, obviously getting a higher rent than everywhere else. That's the reflection of the 7 CRUs and the 4 CRUs that are on the right side of the graph. So they are part of the marketplace. They are better. It is a new building. It's going to get a higher rent, and it's reflective of that. So. Further out analytics determines that the 129 in-place leases, 85% are within $15.23 and $21.23, with a mean of $18.10. 7 new leases or 5% are within 21 per square foot and 23.18 square foot range, with a mean of $21.89, and 81 new leases or 53% are signed within the $18.22 foot range. And that's kind of where you see the mean of the market, between $18 and $22, with an average, weighted average of that. So just around $19 above. So on the reference date, that's April 1st, 2021, the assessor satisfied that for below average OFAs, and I use that term loosely. There are no OFA class building, all of them are OFAs for a reason, but within the OFA market, there is a range. So for below average performing OFAs, the property stabilized, the property below average performing OFA property, the stabilized rent is between $17 and $18. For an average, it's between $18 and $22. For above average, it appears to be between $22 and $24, which is 311 Portage. I'll get to that in a further talk on that in a moment. These findings are supported by outside sources, and again, I can go through that as well, or you can just read through it. Basically, outside sources are showing that to get into the marketplace, you're asking at about $20 square foot. There is a couple at about 18, but generally it's about $20 square foot to get into the marketplace for an OFA. For the vacancies, and here's a little bit of there's a little bit of an issue here. The vacancy data shown is the vacancy experience in an individual year. The 2020 marketplace average is $21.3%, and the weighted average is 20.3%, and the median vacancy is 19.8%. The 2018 to 2020 stabilized global marketplace average is 15.8%. And the weighted average vacancy is 16.4%, and the median vacancy is 11.1%. And that's reflective of what they're showing on the INEs. So when they put on the INEs, I'm not just using the number that they're writing in. I'm literally going through the rent roll. I'm looking at the actual vacancy or use. We're taking that into a high look. Oftentimes someone will write a number in, but it's a reflective of the point in time. And when you actually do the numerical work, it may differ a little bit as far as the actual CRUs that are occupied. So that's what they're holding out to us. When we went through, and I went through the Johnson report and Cushman Wakefield, you see that from 2020, the average was 9.5%, and the 2018 to 2020 stabilized vacancy is 9.1%. The Johnson report indicates 2020 average of 9.5%, and the weighted average vacancy is 13%, and the median is 13.2%. And for the 2018 to 2020 stabilized average, for that's the Johnson report, the average vacancy is 7.3%, the weighted average vacancy is 9.7%, and the median is 8.1%. So right there was a high degree of pause. My numbers getting quite different. So when we went through the marketplace, what it was indicated was not all the spaces were being advertised by property owners, and that's really reflective of a couple that you see here, and I'll go through. There's been some of that space that's being held back. Either there's committed spaces already, there's contracts in place already, or there's brokers that are already actively marketing and they already know they have a tenant. So you're not going to advertise that space. Risk of vacancy should, part of the test of vacancy is you have to actively market it, you have to actively expose it to the market. If you're not doing that, then that's not something you should be including in a market vacancy. So I'll get to the commentary on that now. Further analysis revealed that unoccupied spaces reported to the Assessment and Taxation Department. Much of it includes spaces that have already lease commitments and or were not offered or advertised in the marketplace. In general, vacancy occurring within real property requires effective management, which includes advertising a vacant space, unoccupied spaces being withheld from the marketplace for various reasons, such as amalgamation of CRUs for new anchor tenants, renovations, movement of tenants within a property, doesn't meet this test. So, and there's numerous municipal code orders that indicate market exposure on advertising the vacant spaces before considering adjustments to vacancy. So when I went through the marketplace as a whole, what's reflected on our IDs, what's reflected on what the property owners are doing and the rates that they're advertising, the spaces that they are advertising, I found it more reasonable to put in the 10%, which is pretty much what Johnson report was indicating and Cushman Wakefield. So from there, I'm satisfied that a 10% market vacancy is appropriate. For non-recoverables, the non-recoverables data shown consists of non-recoverable costs experienced in an individual year, minus any below line items or non-operating costs, often including as tenant inducements or improvements, leasing commissions, incentives, free rents, etc. We don't include that obviously in ours. There will be some difference between the non-recoverables the agent presents because the methodology is different and it's well acknowledged from the last cycle. So I don't think we really need to get into much more than that. The 2020 global marketplace average non-recoverable is 2.2%. The weighted average non-recoverable is 2.6%, and the median non-recoverable is 1.6%. The 2018 to 2020 stabilized global marketplace non-recoverable cost is 2.3%. The weighted average non-recoverable cost is 2.6%, and the median non-recoverable cost is 1.6%. So after that, the same analysis went into the shortfall. Shortfall data shown consists of reported shortfall cost per experience in an individual year. The 2020 global average shortfall is $20.03. The weighted average shortfall is $19.31, and the median shortfall is $20.71. The 2018 to 2020 stabilized global marketplace average shortfall is $19.59. The weighted average shortfall is $19.32, and the median shortfall is $19.40. Outside sources indicate that from the Johnson report, and the Johnson report is the only one that actually does this. Cushman Wakefield doesn't. But because there's actual inventory for Johnson report, you can use that information. So the Johnson report indicates that the 2020 average shortfall is $18.34. The weighted average shortfall is $19.08, and the median shortfall is $18.49. And the 2018 to 2020 stabilized average shortfall is $17.80. The weighted average is $17.92, and the shortfall median shortfall is $18.34. Our numbers different a little bit from modeling because modeling also looks at the owner occupied aspect of it. Costs are costs regardless of who pays for them. So they have a bit more that they would have looked at. I don't because I'm just looking at the actual ones that are renting and incorporating that into the study. Would it be fair to incorporate owner occupied costs into it? Same way as if you included the vacant space, which would be vacant because they don't participate in the marketplace, it would artificially lower it. You shouldn't be doing that. So I isolated it to the 6 that rent. So with all that, I'll go through the actual charts that we put in to kind of explain the commentary. And this is kind of, I try to put it in a way that is concise and accurate and usable as can be. So as we look here at page 65, this is the OFA marketplace study overview. This is all of the marketplace being reflective. You're doing an average, weighted average, median, min, max rents. Exactly what I was commenting to earlier. You have your 6-year study. You have your individual years leading up to the reference date, which 18, 19, and 20, and then you have your stabilized to the right. So I'm choosing to look at the stabilized, not just the last year, because it's more reflective of a block of time that any investor would look at. For buildings, when you're spending what you're spending to purchase one of these, you're not going to be just looking at 1 year. You should be looking at the history, and since we can't do it we can't explore anything past the reference date, we're limited to looking at just the time leading up to the reference date. So I think a 6-year analysis is good for these properties, this property type class. and stabilizing the last three is very it is very conservative and reflective of what the market would be. So as you can see, the numbers are in place there. Pay particular note to the vacancies, and I'll go over that as we move along. They're higher from what we actually shown on reflective of the IDs. We see that again, we have a stabilized rent of about $19.21. We have a vacancy weighted average of about $16 or 16.4%, and that's for 152 series that leased up or step ups in place that for the 3 years leading up to the reference date. And below that is obviously what we just talked to, the shortfall and the non-recoverable expenses. Below that is the charts. It produced a near perfect distribution pattern. The only way that it's a little off is you see a little bit of flattening to the right, and that is because the influence of 311 Portage. Their new building, there's 2 tenants in there for office tenants. They had new leases in place and some step ups that we caught as well. So it's being reflective of a higher end building. They're getting a higher rent right there. So below the chart, again, I already went over this one standard deviation, which is a median marketplace in grading. Outside is the not quite extreme, but getting outside of the 68% of the marketplace. And then in red is obviously the outliers. I look at this as if you are going to put in anything outside of the second standard deviation, you've got to have a really good reason for it. Meaning, you look at a building, the contract rents in place, the rents that we have, not one has been achieved in that building. Why? There's a good reason not to put any market rent in. There must be a reason. Same way, 311 Portage, we see what the average is at around 19. They're getting considerably more than that. They don't have a $19 rent in that building. That's because they're better than that. So that's another look at it in that way as well. So this isn't just isolated to what the market is. We should be looking at what the performance of the building is too, and also looking at the market. So we're doing a leasehold analysis, and we should be doing the marketplace analysis. Obviously, in this case, if there are occupied, there is no leasehold we can do. So below the chart is just a grouping showing how many rents are in place between the per dollar range. And it's just a reflective showing where the median of the market can be a little bit more on that. So underneath that is your OFA outside sources. We already spoke to that at length. Just to make sure that I wanted to point out that on the 19 year for Cushman and Wakefield, you see a $25.97 rent average for asking. That's the influence of True North. They're obviously leasing out. It's a blip. And then the market went back down because basically True North built up. It doesn't show it in the Johnson report because I redacted that out. I do not believe that building. I haven't had a chance to review it in full. We just recently got the full rent roll. I got made available a full rent roll to review. But that found that wasn't done when this study was being done, and it wasn't done when this assessment was derived. So on the next page, we can see the individual buildings that were looked at. So again, all 6 were looked at: 360 Main, 201 Portage, 375 Main, 200 Graham, 400 St. Mary's, and then again 311 Portage, and you can see the rents that are in place there as well. It's a good. You look at that. That's the higher standard, the typical OFA. It is a new building. If you look at 400 St. Mary's, which is just above it, that is still graded an OFA. There's argument to be made. It's a B prime, B minus. Straddles that boundary. You can see there is a difference. So there is a variance within the working marketplace, and we're capturing it all, and we're showing reflectively what it is. So you should be looking at the individual properties as well as what the marketplace says. So lastly, I'll kind of stop off as far as vacancy. You see the vacancy for example, a 201 Portage, it's at 1.5%. It's at 4% for 15, and the year's going up. It's at 4%, and then it's at 5.8%, and then it's at 8.8%, and then 13.4%, and 17.69%. You look over at my study; those are dramatically different numbers. We asked 30% in the 30% range, 20% range, 3 years later now. So we're doing a reflective of what's being offered to market in this case here. Chose to go with the marketplace was indicating at 10%. So from that, you have the complete marketplace in your fingertips. You can review it any way you like. You can review our perspective on it. You can, if you want to use it in any way, you have the totality of the marketplace in front of you. So getting back to the actual workup, page 10, I selected $19.75 for the billing. It is at the 2/3, a little over the average after review. The reason why I left it there was because I only had 311 Portage to work with, which is consistent of 2 tenants. They're in around the $23 to $24 range. I didn't feel it was enough of a market for me to make a judgment to push it past that. Obviously, when we look at this building, it should be receiving one of the highest, if not the highest, assessment rate per square foot. When I'm looking at the rents that are in place for the marketplace, you would assume that you'd be able to get the highest rent here. Not only would you be able to get the highest rent here, if your building efficiency is 70% greater, that net effective rate would even increase further. But the only rents that I really had to work from was the ones that you've seen recently within the last few weeks. I was made available True North's building. The rent roll is significantly greater than this. I believe that building is more reflective of what this property should be assessed at, but because I didn't have access to that income and expense information, there was no way that I could use just 311 Portage and a couple tenants there to make any adjustment upwards of that. So I want to make that clear now. I think $19.75 rent is very, very conservative. If I had the full market of True North at my disposal, I think that building is more reflective of that combined with 311 Portage. This rent should be considerably increased based on the building itself and the superiority of the building itself. So with that, I'll just kind of do in closing. This is rated one of the best buildings in America. It's rated the most important building and most energy efficient building in Canada. And literally there you can go through university lecture on it and see just how good it is. I feel a value of 138,476,000 is very conservative. And at this point in time, I think it should be confirmed here today, but I don't know what the questions are.
Thank you, Mr. Pohl. Mr. Slaughter, I'm assuming you have some questions for the assessor.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I also have some rebuttal evidence, so perhaps we could just table that for later and we'll go through the questions
Yes,
first.
let's do the questions first and then we'll do the rebuttal. Thank you.
Certainly. Okay, thank you, Mr. Pohl. I'd like to start the questions around the study. Now, you had mentioned the study looked at, it broke down, and actually, if I could ask the panel to turn to the study, the real summary of the study is found on page, I believe, 4, if I have the same version that everyone else has.
On the 60s.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll go to the version of the assessor's.
The pages themselves are labels.
So
the
the
pages are labeled. Just turn to, don't use the 60-some pages, just underneath full revision. Oh yeah, I see. This was a natural study, I just put it in place.
Okay, so I think it would be page 67 of your brief, but page 6 of the study. I think that's where I'd like to start with questions.
Okay. Are you looking at the Johnson report?
No, at the very top of the page it says OFA marketplace study analysis. So I guess this is the summary or the conclusions of the study. And page 67.
Yeah. That's not the conclusion. That's just the Johnson report and the individual properties that were being looked at. 6.
Oh yes, that's right. That's an individual property. Okay, apologies again. If I could ask the panel, please, to turn to page 65, which is I would write page 4 of the
hey, there you go.
of the study. Yeah.
A lot of numbers. Sorry.
Okay, so what we have here is an analysis of the 6 Class A buildings, and you show the rents over 6 years, but we're really looking at the 18 to 20. But you'd agree that the stabilized, or sorry, the market rents as per your study The net rents, they haven't really changed much since 2015. I mean, they fluctuate a bit year to year, but you'll see your stabilized average is actually lower than your 2020. And so relatively stable face rents. Would you agree?
I would agree with that, yes.
Okay. And your vacancy allowance, or sorry, not your vacancy allowance, your vacancy average has increased significantly. It appears from 2017, which would be the last full year before the last reference date, to 20, it basically doubled in the Class A market.
Numerically, that's what's reflected on the study.
Yeah.
As what we see on the actual what's being offered in the marketplace, that would be no. We see that there's about a 10%, 10% of vacancy in the marketplace.
When you look at the overall universal.
When I look outside of our INEs, the actual marketplace is being advertised.
Okay. So what you see when you look at advertisements, you're saying contradicts what the owners have submitted and what the market is.
The owners are being reflective of what spaces are being occupied in their building. If they don't have anyone in that space, they're showing it as unoccupied, so it'd be vacant. But if they're holding that space back from market because there's anchor tenants that they already have, that they're already doing work for, or they have a clientele list they're ready to get in, you're not going to be actively marketing those spaces because there's no need for it.
But based on what the owners have reported, which is
That's
the meat of the study, you'd agree that with static rents and an increasing vacancy, that's a sign of a softening market. Would you agree?
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. You'd have to look at the marketplace as a whole. Obviously,
Is this not marketplace as a whole?
this is the marketplace as a whole, but you'd also have to look at, you see the True North coming online, you see some of the shifting of tenants being moved. Anyone who would be looking at that wouldn't be assuming that that vacancy would be a long-term vacancy. You'd be looking at a short-cap vacancy, or they would have to refill their building with new tenants, which ultimately you're seeing. So
You're okay. So I'll come back to that. The study you mentioned, when you segment the years, I guess what you're trying to show us is the market behavior in those individual years, so that we're not looking at all the rents, but just what was the meeting of the minds in those years.
we're looking at what's the rents that are effectively in place with the costs that are associated with the vacancy that's associated with it. So we're keeping everything linear within that year.
Okay, yeah, but you'd agree though that you're in each year, the rents that you look at are not just rents signed in that year, they're including stepped up rents that may have been negotiated years and years before.
Most of them are new, some of them are step ups, but we're being reflected as we go along. As I indicated, if you had free rent in the first 3 years of your 5-year term and there's a break to get you in the building, those step ups are usually eroded back to market. So as you catch the step ups going along, you're reducing the influence of tenant inducements, free rents, such of that nature. So when we're looking at what's being reflected, I'm literally going through the INEs. We're coming up with a cost of vacancy. We're seeing each individual CRU, and where there is a change, we're reflected on that change for the year.
Right, but you would agree that a step up is not a meeting of the minds in that given year. It's a negotiation that happened years before, and then an estimation of where the parties believe the market would be.
Where that rent would have been, that contract would have been signed. There are also renegotiations of the market, right, that are reflected per 5-year block, whatever your contract is, right, whatever your lease is. So we're just being reflective of what the market is, when the owners are showing us what the market is in individual years leading down to the reference date.
Okay, so why would we not then look at the rents in the marketplace in that given year? For 2020, for example, what you've shown us is just some of the leases negotiated, which I think is a very good thing to show because you're showing market sentiment at that time. But then when you include step ups, you're including negotiations that happened years before. And then the next question would be, well, why would we not just look at what's happening in the market then amongst all 190 leases?
We are looking at all the leases. I don't believe I understand yet. Let me see the numbers that are in the study. I don't believe I missed any CRUs that are leasing up, changing rates.
If the lease did not step up in those given years and it was negotiated in 2014, would it be included in the study?
No.
Okay, so it's not all rents. It's
no, like I said in the beginning, if you had a rent that started prior to 2015 and it was at X amount, if it was 10 years, I wouldn't be using that in place. I would be using the newer leases that are in place and the step ups being caught as they go along. So if that's a stagnant rent, that's not one that would have been included in. So what we're trying to do is be reflective of the market approaching the reference date, but also being fully aware how tenant inducements works, free rents were tenant TIs work, and we're trying to make sure that influence is lesser than as we move on forwards.
Okay, so just to summarize though, in any given year that you show, it is not just rents negotiated, it includes step ups. And number two, any rents that were negotiated before 2014 and did not step up would not be reflected in the study.
No, nothing before 2014 is in the studies.
Okay,
So it's pretty easy. It's just new rents that are in place, whatever they fall in at, or the rents that are being reflective in the changes of step ups in those years. We're catching them as we go through.
now we don't see here the rents in place that you used in the study, but you and I have discussed some of those rents. And to confirm, we don't have main floor retail restaurants, main floor banks. We have that.
No, I have looked at that. I recorded it, but I redacted them out of the study. So,
But that it hasn't changed here.
no. Like what I'm saying is, when I'm going through this, I can literally turn off. I don't know what's the word, but I can turn off the regular series spaces, and I can just look at Skywalk rents, or then I can just look at main floor rents, so we can get a reflection of what those particular series on those sites of those buildings would be worth.
So to confirm though, there is main floor banks included in this study.
No. It's
201 Portage, the bank that I had listed to you in email.
Yeah.
That's included in the study.
As I showed you in this year, and like as you've seen in what we provided to you,
Yeah.
it's redacted out, like literally it's there, but we put a little explanation mark in front of it, which removes it from the.
Oh, you removed it, okay.
So what I'm saying is, if I wanted to remove all of the normal tenancies and CRUs and just leave main floor banks, I can flip it back the other way.
Okay.
Or if I wanted to do just Skywalk area rents, retail rents, I could flip it to those. The studies, the spreadsheet I created was quite malleable to that.
Okay, and the second question, you and I had talked about this, but there had been care, of course, because not all rents that show on a rent roll will be net. You can have semi-gross or gross rents, especially with provincial or federal tenants. And you had mentioned that you had tried to net those down, but there was one that I asked you about, the CRA lease, which is large. I mean, this would really make a difference because it's 63,000 square feet at Class A tower at Origin Main. You showed that rent at over $21, and that was a semi-gross rent. Has that been adjusted?
I did that this morning. It was like, as you can see, it barely changes it. I removed it from the study completely. Now,
Well, if I'm correct, it drastically changes your weighted average.
look to the left under the reds. I can provide it to the board if they want.
Yeah, your weighted average went from, well, not drastically, but 1921 to 1907.
Yeah, it changed it for the year itself. It changed it 4.58%. When you look at the 3-year stabilized, they changed it 0.073%. So it's virtually negligible. The reason why that is because we're doing a proper study of a allied marketplace. You're not looking at 6 rents, and then if you remove one, it may drastically change it. When you're actually looking at, sorry, maybe we should look to share that for kitchen.
Yeah, I have to scan it for my chair.
You can look at it in a moment, or we can take a break. And
Yeah. Yeah, you can get it to me when we break
Yeah.
up. That's
So basically, all it shows is
I'm following what you're saying. I'm following.
when it's done properly, and you're dealing with a total populace of the marketplace, and there's a large amount of value here. When you remove a little bit of it, it shouldn't change the values all that drastically.
Well, it changed it a fair amount, and that's 63,000 feet. So we're up from 1921 to 1907. So now we know we're dealing with 1907 as your weighted average.
No, let me get back to that lease itself. Obviously, I looked at it, and you looked at it, the enroll on the rent roll shows net office net. When you go through it, it shows earlier than not recovering all of the.
That's not recovered.
Yeah, yes, correct. But I haven't seen a lease on that, or I haven't seen the breakdown on it. When you look more importantly at all of it, they're only showing 3 years. Typically, an artist or tenant will show on the rent roll the totality, the rent step ups, when everything. I'm just seeing CRU for 3 years. And given their volume of work that went into their space to be moved from Broadway to there's obviously a longer than a 3-year tenant.
Just to be clear, Mr. Paul, you understand that lease that you're referring to here is actually the original lease from 2009 that stepped up. The lease that you're referring to when they refurbished the space is a new lease.
Yeah.
that is not this lease. You understand?
Right, I'm aware of that, but what I'm saying is when I'm seeing reflective of what's there, before I make that change, I'd like to see that lease, which obviously has been provided, so.
Right.
I don't think it's out of line with how the building is being advertised for $360, maybe between $20 and $21, depending on where you are in the building. And if you look at the rental throughout the building.
But again, you understand that this CRA lease for 63,000 feet negotiated in 2009 is superseded by January 1st, 21. Actually, it was negotiated in 2016.
I can only show what's reflective on the IDs, what they held out to us. If there's something else and it's not on their ID, I don't have access to that.
Okay, so you were very aware that this space was consolidated for 325 Broadway.
I don't believe they sold their CRA sold their building on Broadway for 3 years.
So I guess I'll get right to the question, Mr. Pohl, is that you are aware that this lease here was superseded by a new lease as of January 1st, 21, and that would be germane to our discussions today, correct?
Yeah, like I'm being reflective when we removed it from the analysis. As you can see, it didn't cause anything.
No, but my question is that the new lease is not included in the study, is it? No. January
I don't
1st.
have access to it. So
Okay.
what I'm trying to be reflective of is like when I go through the rental one, an artist read shows every tenant and how long their leases are and the step-ups that are involved and when they'll be future forecasted for. When you see CRA come into the building and do the investment that they did in the building, and you don't see anything other than a 3-year lease, you know that's not the lease.
Right.
So
Okay, so
at least that's not the full lease.
you mentioned that this sort of study has never been done before by the city.
No.
You would agree, though, that all of the rents that are the basis of the study are supplied to the city on an annual basis.
Yes.
And they're entered into the CAMA model.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, yeah.
And then the CAMA model, you have expert modelers who then make adjustments based on linear regression to the data to determine the appropriate rates for different variables. So this is kind of a simplified version of the model, is it not?
I don't want to say it the wrong way, and I don't want to. Modelers do what they do, and they're very good at what they do. I found that the rents have been very accurate once we switched over to our old Canada system to a new one. But I'm going to do this based on my knowledge of the marketplace. I'm going to do this based on my knowledge of case law, and I'm verifying what they're doing. I essentially created my own little model, whatever comes from them will be vetted through this to ensure that it is reflective of the market.
Yeah, you made a comment that I thought was interesting. You said I selected the market rent. So you had, I guess, overridden the model for the current assessment. Okay, based on
just the rent.
Okay,
And that was the commentary why. I'm looking at only 2 tenants at 311 Portage, which are greater at the $23 to $24 range, and realistically, should it be there? I can't do that based on showing tenants. That's not enough, in my opinion. So I went to the conservative end and put it at a little bit more than mid-range of the model, or a little bit more than mid-range of the study. And then a few weeks ago, True North's rental was made available to the department via all this. I'm now going to be involved in that as well. Now that we have True North, which is a high-end building greater than the average, and we have Portage, which is greater than the average. We now have a marketplace to review what the best, most efficient building in the city, in the country, would maybe lease out at.
well,
So when I'm looking at this, and I want to make it very clear, moving forward, if this gets appealed to the municipal board, I'll be reviewing 201 Portage as well as 311 Portage, or sorry, True North, as well as 311 Portage, and making more of a reflection on what this rent may be, and that will include a review of the expenses in 360 Portage to see if they are right around 70% greater than. Because if you are greater, or I should say less than the marketplace, if you are paying 70% less, there would be a net reflection of that in the rent that you could achieve here.
so True North, you agree that that's considered a class AA, is that correct?
Yeah.
It's a different classification.
Oh, yes, and that's, yeah, make no mistake, it is the premier building in the city now for classic buildings, but when you look at this building, it is superior to that. Like, it just is.
That would be your opinion
Multiple engineers awards, right?
on efficiency, but
I'm not gonna differentiate on that. I mean, I've been through a lot of them. It is a phenomenal building where it's world renowned.
The 311 Portage, you mentioned this one, and it pops up a number of times in your study because I guess it steps up on an annual basis. And you admitted that that fell outside of the second standard deviation. It was definitely an outlier.
Yep.
Yeah.
Identified as such.
And you're aware that Stantec designed and built 311 Portage.
I believe they had a large role, I guess.
Yeah, they designed it and built it, and they are the main tenant of the 16,000 square feet. I mean, typically we would consider that an arm's length lease.
Until I see a lease where there was a sum taken back and maybe I can't say that they're showing their arms like they're showing their neck. I'm not gonna redact that back.
But you agree it's completely an outlier, and you agree that it has a red flag raised as far as the arm's length nature of the
I
tenant.
would disagree with arm's length nature. I don't know, were they paid, were they not? That's speculative.
Okay.
But as far as being an outlier, I want to make it clear. This is a brand new building. You would get a better.
Sorry, which is a brand new building?
The 311. Well, 311 is.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And that's a reflection of where you think the marketplace would be. There would be a greater efficiencies in the building, and they're pushing the rent higher. We're not transposing that rent back onto the rest of the marketplace, but when we're looking at buildings that are higher efficiency, those two tenants there, I couldn't put to this subject property because it's just not enough. But now we have True North and multiple towers there. We're doing multiple rents at C. So these two towers total would be good comparisons to the subject property that 360 Portage. It just, I was not and could not do that in the look because all this through the owner, we just recently got that information. So this role would have been set way in advance. Even for the appeal process today, I couldn't use the True North role.
Okay, so a couple of things that just to reiterate as we went through the questions is the study has not considered leases which would be germane to our discussion because they commenced before April 1st, 2021. And specifically, I'm talking about the CRA lease for 133,000 square feet at 360 Main. That is not included in the study.
Just what's reflected on the rentals from 2000.
Okay. And the second point is that you had adjusted the rent for this property based on your study.
Right.
And it appears that in the study, the one lease that you're really putting the weight on, it sounds like, is Stantec at 311 Portage.
No, if I was putting a lot of weight on that, it'd be at $23 to $24 for the subject property. I just said I excluded it.
Okay, it's excluded. So
because it's not enough. If I had several buildings where there's several rents in there on that page, I could then transpose that to the subject property.
right.
But because there's only two tenants there, realistically, that wasn't enough. I erred on the side of caution. Marketplace, but a bit of a higher.
Okay, so then what we know is that if Stantec isn't included, though, it still pushes the weighted average up in your study. And we have a corrected weighted average when we correct the old CRA lease to be net, and we had a weighted average of 1917 a square foot now. The subject property is owner occupied, single occupant, correct?
Yeah, for the roll number itself, yes.
So it's over 500,000 square feet is the space that would be occupied. And you have a rent that's higher than your average for, typical sized Class A units. Has economies of scale at all been considered in your application of a
As far as economies of scale, there would be no. I have trouble with this because there has never been a proven herd analysis to get to this. Even if you're moving to St. Mary's order, there is no upper end bracket for a 500,000 square foot tenant. So you really cannot do that marketplace analysis.
Okay.
The only thing we can do is look to the case law and look to the marketplace itself. And I've looked to Great West Life. That's the largest building, single tenant building in the city. They didn't apply economies of scale to that order. That's one of the ones I used to do this day as well.
But they did mention it in the most recent decision for St. Mary's. It's quite clear. It was fun.
And I made available my commentary to yourself as well.
Okay.
How that order went. So,
but just to be clear, then, for the panel's sake, that in applying that rent, overriding the model, applying your rent that is based on your study, economies of scale has not been considered.
When we look at the marketplace as a totality, I've looked at the marketplace here, economies of scale as far as, do I have a rent at 500,000? Do I have a rent at 200,000? We don't have those rents with the marketplace to do a paired analysis, so there is no way to justify any kind of increase or reduction.
Well, I would disagree with that, Mr. Cole. I think your study has many rents of larger units, which would show the effect. Now, I agree with you on one thing. Economies of scale, you have to make sure that you're looking at apples to apples, that all other factors are equal. So it is a tricky thing. But I think your study would point out that larger units typically rent for a lower amount per square foot.
What my study typically shows is that larger tenants are usually anchor tenants, and they're influenced with tenant inducements in the first few years, and it reduces such that from that on. So.
Okay, can you explain that concept? You mentioned that you're trying to minimize the effect of tenant inducements. When you say that, you're talking about, I think your example was free rent at the beginning of the term.
Whether it's free rent brought in or the tenant is paying for some or all the tenant improvements for the space, you would get a break on the rents.
So what about the converse, Mr. Cole? I mean, you understand that many of the leases in Class A buildings, especially in a tenants market like we're in today, have significant TIs, that is landlord investment, in order to attain those rents. And basically you'd agree that as the investment by the landlord goes up, so too would the rent being paid by the tenant. So when you say you're trying to minimize the effect of tenant inducements, have you considered that aspect at all?
Sorry, Saturday.
Looking into the amount that landlords have had to spend in order to attain the higher rents. In other words, the higher rents in your study are influenced by significant landlord tenant inducement.
No, because the tenant inducement would reduce the rent. Once you take that reduction away, it goes back to market.
Well, I think we have a very different interpretation of tenant inducements, Mr. Cole.
I supplied you with all 660 rents for the two studies.
I have all 660 rents. I work for every one of these buildings and I interview all the owners. And I know that, so let me put it this way. You would not agree that many of these rents, you've had it in your evidence, the permits, significant permit values that the owners have invested into these leases. That's not a consideration at all when you say you're trying to minimize the effect of tenant inducements.
I just stated that this whole study is created in a way that does minimize it. Catching the rents as they go back to market or less influence to market as the leases go along. Yeah,
to me, if you're trying to reflect it, you would recognize where a rent is above market because it has a significant tenant inducement, but we don't see that at all. It's just taken as, oh, this is the fixed rent.
It's significantly above market because it has a tenant inducement.
100%.
So tell me which rents are being overpaid then, like how do you work that out? Usually tenant inducement reduces the rent that you pay.
No, it inflates the rent that you pay because the landlord has invested an amount which they amortize into the rent.
Right. So when they're paying, say, $17 and they're showing the tenant inducement and it should be around $20, you're saying that somehow that is not, or that's overinflated the $20 when they're showing it to be?
What I'm saying is if I am examining rents in a market, I would take the time to examine those that stand out as higher or lower. And I would discover that typically when they're higher, it's because the landlord had to invest more money into those leases. And then the question in my mind would be the same thing I do if I'm looking at buying a house. The next door house that sold is almost identical, that it had $100,000 in renovations put in. Mine was last renovated in 1992. Is that a factor in my determination of value? Of course it is. So my point is that I don't think you've recognized the factors which would inflate the higher end of the rents.
No, I have. What you're saying is that the tenant, did the owner pay? What I'm saying is I'm reflecting the one that I know that the tenant paid. Okay. Well,
I'll tell you what, Mr. Gold, I'll leave this for rebuttal then, because this is an important point, and I guess it's not coming up in questioning, but I'll talk about it in rebuttal. The effect.
Because we're getting into more of a debate than a question here. So
thank you. Yeah, thanks, Madam. Capitalization rate of 6%. Do you have any evidence to support that?
Oh, yeah, sorry, maybe I lost one that there's a lot here. Page 57 and 58. There has been no sales of OFA buildings with the exception of 201 Portage, which that building, that sales never been released to the public. So the only ones we can go with are the OFBs that have sold leading up to the reference date. There has been 4, 1 at 1 at 240 grand, which you see there, capitalization rents or capitalization rates, which is hovering around 6, little over 6. And then on 220 Portage, again, hovering around 6. There's also 1 at 175 Hargrave and 330 St. Mary's, which effectively were a multi-roll sale with a couple.
But hang on, is that evidence?
No, I'm just speaking to you, asking me the rents, so.
Yeah, I'm asking what you have.
Here's the evidence that we have. The reason why I excluded that is because it was multi-passive, multi-roles, apartment, and all the rest of it. So these are the two that are the most recent. And these don't trade as much on the marketplace. You're not gonna have separate per cycle. So these are the direct evidence of market. And given the fact that OFAs would generate more per square foot, you would think that if an OFA were to sell, it would get a higher cap.
So both of these sales are Class Bs that sold in the early part of the 2010s.
Yeah.
Okay. And both of these sales are 50% purchases. 50% interest.
No, just so we're clear, because we'll be here for this. 240 grand was a 50% interest sale. 220 portage, and I think we clarified this last time.
No, I think we disagreed on this, but go ahead.
It was a half interest sale.
Mhm.
When I looked at it, when we went further back to artist resale, it was 2 half interest sales on the same date.
Yeah, it was
So it was a
two
full,
half
so it was
interest.
a full interest.
Okay, we have a disagreement on that. They clearly state in their records it was 50% transaction, two separate owners.
Okay, again, we're getting into debate rather than,
Okay.
let's stick to the questions and let Mr. Poole answer the questions and you can present your evidence when
And
you're
so
done.
that is completely accurate what you just said. Before, when I looked at it, it looked like it was 1 half interest sale and artist read or the only other half interest, whatever it wasn't, they didn't know any interest in it.
And you're aware that the IAAO standards are quite clear that 50% interest transactions should be not considered.
I am quite aware of that.
I think that is all my questions. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Mann, do you have any questions for Mr. Poole?
I do. It's some clarifications on well, a number of things. First of all, given the amounts that we're talking about, this is going to seem a little picayune, but the parking at page 68, the comparables, and you assign $103.50 per stall for heated underground. And
Which page?
well, sorry, I'm looking at well, first of all, your workup back on page
Page
page 9 and 10. Page 9 is up, right. You've got $103.50 per stall for 151 stalls. And if you go to page 68, you've got your gross parking structure rates as of April 1st, 2021. The parking rates modeled at $103.50 aren't even close to the monthly rates or the actual, is that the difference between
Those
gross and the net?
those are gross on the one
Okay.
side, and on the other side, it's netted out.
Okay.
Just so we're clear, I'm going with what our study, or should say our modelers did. Typically, when I review these at municipal board, I look at like I've done already, from basically North Porter south to Broadway, and then Memorial over to a big pass Main Street. These are monthly rates. Typically, when we look at stalls and I look at how the performance of the parking lot is, it misses the transient and we can park in event parking, or I would catch all that. These are very conservative. I'm not looking to make any adjustments from $103. I know that to be quite conservative.
And they don't even allow monthly or transient or weekend parking at the hybrid building.
No, you would have to check how the operating strategy is in place. So this one here is reserved for their employees, I believe. I don't think it's open to market.
Moving on generally, I guess, to the OFA marketplace study. Very interesting read. Thank you.
It's a lot, and I didn't want to put the commentary in, but I mean it's necessary now because the timing of the deal. So hopefully it's enough. But,
well, by my perspective, I enjoyed it last night. But what I'm interested in is the comparables, all of the leases that were reviewed, leading to the bell curve at page 65. Backing up a little bit, in the early part of your evidence, you indicated that this building was essentially the best of the best.
yeah.
What other buildings in Winnipeg would be comparable to it?
And that's where I tried to sum up. There really isn't one. I mean, no, like they built True North and I just was made available and rent roll was just put in. I just looked at like the roll was set, the assessed value for this was set, even my appeal work was done for today's appeal. And then that rent roll was made available to us and I'm looking at it now. 311 Portage was made available and that would be the most comparable. And it's right across the street. It's again, a higher end full pay, but there's only two tenants. It's only two tenants into a large marketplace. It wasn't enough to say, well, transpose that income from there to this building here. But now that we have this at 311 Portage and we can look at the towers at True North, we have a much better understanding of what higher end rents would be. True North is roughly around $30 triple net. This one here is at 311 Portage is $24 triple net. When you look at a building at this subject property, you would think that to be easily be able to achieve that considering the efficiencies in the building as far as making 70% better than the market. But before I make any adjustments to this, I would go through 311 Portage on both income and expense side. Then I would go through all of the North, which just came online. It's been releasing now, but realistically, I now have the paper copies of in my hand I can look at. Then I would reconcile where this would fall. And that's why I made the commentary that with that information, I'd be looking for a higher rent rate here, but I did not have that available to me before this meeting.
This model, for want of a better word, that you have established with respect to this shows the average weighted rents, the median weighted, and the range weighted averages. And then you indicated a few times that you overrode the 3-year weighted average from.
Oh no, I didn't know. There was an issue that came up in discussion with Mr. Slaughter where the CRA rent was questioned. So what I did was I removed it just to show that when you do a large sample, if you remove a small tenant, it shouldn't change the sample. It shouldn't change the populace results, and it didn't. Like literally, it changed it. I mean, you'll have the paper in front of you. It virtually didn't change anything, and that was a large tenant. So,
I guess I understand the removing of a small sample or a smaller sample.
Yeah.
But the 1975 per square foot, that was derived how?
1975 was after I reviewed everything. I looked at what I felt it should go at, what it would go at based on the information I had. I feel that $19.75, which is greater than $19.21, and just below the 2020, which is $19.94, is in between those two. I feel $19.75 overall for the building based on the information we had at that point in time is as high as I could put that rent comfortably, where it should be, right? But we have True North coming online and I have access to all their financials and their rent rolls. Now we have 311 Portage, which is enough. The assessor now has ability to judge this performance of this building. And before I would do that, I would have to go through all three buildings, ensure that the subject property itself is achieving a higher, greater than average efficiency and net occupancy cost. Because if you were going to be a paying tenant and you're going to give your rent in that basis, if you're paying less for cost, it's going to raise that effective net rents.
Okay, thank you. My final series of questions relates to the economies of scale that was being discussed toward the end. This is 517,593 square feet for a single owner-occupied space, and for want of a better word. And you indicated that there just is not that kind of comparative study done for Winnipeg market.
No.
What about other markets?
I don't examine anything outside of Winnipeg, obviously.
I just meant for comparative studies. Have there been comparative studies with respect to economies of scale affecting Class A buildings in larger jurisdictions?
I couldn't tell you, or I'm not aware of any. Like the way that I've looked at economies of scale, I don't think it's really been. You can play both sides of that coin. Realistically, we have to do a comparative analysis. We don't have a smaller sample or CRU to the largest, then you would have to somehow do the numerical math on that. But we don't have that for these size of buildings. What my look, if we are gonna explore that route, and it's not done here today, and it's not done in this board, and the reason why I haven't done it is because you have pretty good orders from this board indicate not to, you should be looking at a floor plate. Your largest size floor plate in your building would be your bracket, because you could lease out that floor plate to multiple tenants.
Right.
So from that floor plate, you could go to the marketplace and then you can maybe do that analysis. But I don't see the relevance for here today, especially when I'm looking at, they did Great West Lane for a number of years and they didn't apply economies of scale. Basically, what you see here today is what they did when I observed this hearing. They looked at it was an owner occupied building, first of all. They looked at the marketplace, what it was leasing out at. The assessor brought in what they felt, the agent brought in what they felt. Then they looked at the Johnson report to see what it was. And they reconciled between the two. They didn't have economies of scale for large building, owner occupied building in the city. So from that aspect, it was quite clear this is how we should look at it. So for economies of scale, I haven't explored that.
So great, thank you very much. That's my series of questions.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre.
I have several. Would you agree that property assessments are an estimate of value and not an exact science?
Yeah.
And secondly, what's your definition of global marketplace? You've referenced that in this report.
Global marketplace would be all of the buildings. So from this case here for the OFA, we have 6 that rent. So the 6 would be the global marketplace. Or there would be 17. So that would be the totality.
Would you not agree that the word global means the world?
No,
This is Winnipeg's marketplace, right?
it's a term that's used. I mean, you can change it to the Winnipeg, you can change it to any call it what you will if you want. The global is what I used as far as for Winnipeg's global OFA. We have 6 that rent, so that's what it is.
Did you review any of the leases that are part of the study?
Typically we do not get the leases from the owners. I was able to review Great West Life because it was provided to us for St. Mary's order, by hearing, I should say. But the majority of the leases that are in place, we simply don't get. We get a rent roll, we get a rate. Usually, you'll get a step ups or whatever they'll be, and it'll be quite detailed enough that you can make a study off of it. But we don't get the full leases. They virtually never supply.
But certainly we've heard today that these leases change, right?
Unless the owner holds it out to us, we can examine it. And typically, it's just the INE sheets that are sent or the financial data that they use, the income statements that they use there.
So are you the only one doing Class A office buildings?
At appeal, I believe so. I don't assign anything, but I reviewed the OFA. I reviewed the OFA, the OFB populace before percent change review. I obviously had the study done, then the rules were set. So at appeal, I believe I've done all the OFBs so far. I've done the majority of the OFBs. I think a few other people haven't had OFBs as well. Just the way they're scheduled, I can't be at every hearing.
No, I appreciate that. So did you deviate from the model for any of the OFBs?
Yeah, a few of them I made overrides too, given their situation. But I can't be, I didn't review any of that for today's hearing.
Okay.
There was a few that were below market and they needed adjustments. And then there was a few that I don't believe I did anything at the better end of the scale. There's just a few that were flagging in the marketplace.
So did you do all of the OFAs in downtown? And are they all deviating from the model?
Nope. I don't know. Most of them were quite accurate.
We're fine. Okay, that was my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I have just a couple, just for clarification, the document that I didn't see, but I understand what is there, and I'm just going to clarify it, Mr. Pohl, and you can tell me if I have it correct. You removed CRA from that one determination, and it dropped your weighted average from 1921 to 1907. Is that correct?
Yeah, you can wait to see that page. It dropped. I did the 2 years, obviously the 2018 year, and then the stabilized, which also include that. So 2 differences, and as you can see, as you do both year, the individual year and the next year, it's even less of an impact. There's virtually no impact. So once you see the page, it's self-explanatory.
Yeah, I'm just clarifying that I understood it correctly, okay? And when we look at your workup, so you deviated from the model on your rent, your shortfall, and your vacancy, is that correct?
No, I just on sorry, as far as my
Yes.
study, yes.
Yeah, okay. And when I'm looking at your weighted averages for vacancy and shortfall, you've gone lower on vacancy and shortfall both. And I just want to understand that I understood what you said, that was, you were basing a lot of that on the fact that this is owner occupied. Is that correct?
Correct. Like I explained, when I did the vacancy study, it stood out to the OFAs because my numbers were different from what was being held up in the marketplace. But when you went back through it, a lot of that space that was being held up was already reserved or under contract or had commitments by tenants, and usually large acre tenants, which would soak that up for the OFAs. So when you're seeing what's leased out in the Johnson report, what's being advertised in the Johnson report for lease, that is just what they need. They don't have, you're not going to advertise space you already have commitments for, or you're renovating, or you already have it's not at market, it's not offered to market because it's no longer available to market. So that would be the reflection there. So when I looked at it, it was quite clear that the 10% was a more reasonable number than what we had. So
okay, and with the shortfall, that was again, you adjusted that based on owner occupancy as well?
I looked at shortfall based on the buildings that were being rented in the marketplace, which is 6. Obviously, there's more OFAs, and modelers would look at those costs as well. So between all of them, they would come up with their number, but I'm only using the 6 because they're the ones that actually rent. I'm only looking at the ones that participate in the marketplace. But realistically, whether you're owner occupied or you're a tenant or your tenant occupied, those costs are being paid by either the owner or the tenant. So I don't disagree with not using the cost. Cost is a cost regardless of who pays it. So
okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I had. Now, Mr. Slaughter, you said you had some rebuttal evidence.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Would you prefer that we go through that now or after the direct?
Let's do your rebuttal now before you present. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But so we have to find it here. So just a second.
can I just ask for like a 2-minute break? That's okay.
Actually, I might agree with that.
Sorry, what's that?
Okay. Can we get a 2-minute break?
Right now? Okay, I was going to do it after the rebuttal, but we can do it now. Sure. Let's just take 5 then and come back
Sure.
at 10:40. Okay, thank you. I'll call the meeting back to order. And Mr. Slaughter, we took a recess just when you were about to present your rebuttal evidence for Mr. Pohl's presentation. So please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The rebuttal has to do with the city's new market rent study, and I think I commend any time people take the time to really look into what's happening in the market, but we do have different conclusions, which raises a flag to me. How do we have the same data and different conclusions? So I'd like to start with on page 1 of the rebuttal. I think this is very important. That when we look at what's happening in the data, when we just look at that summary, and I asked this in the questioning, rents are basically stable. And when I say that, I mean face rents, because I'm going to be talking about this more today. But what's actually happening in the market is that landlords are having to spend significantly more in tenant inducements in order to attain the face rents. So what is happening is the net effective rents are drastically dropping, but you don't see it when you just look at the face rents. So what you do see is then you go across to the vacancy. And the vacancy is basically doubled, whether you include the entire Class A denominator or just the least Class A denominator. From the last assessment cycle, so the end of 2017 to 2020, it has increased, according to the city study, from 8% based on the leasable downtown Class A to 20%. And when you take a look at those factors and consider that the recoverable and non-recoverable expenses, basically, I think they increased a bit. Well, I know they've increased, but let's say they're fairly static because those are not a major part of the net analysis. But you'll see on page 1 what that means for the aggregate class A. So that's all 6 buildings. What has happened? The income has dropped since last cycle by 38% based on this data. And I don't disagree with that conclusion. That is what's happening in the market. This is a softening of the class A market. And let's be clear, we're not talking about what happened from the pandemic. This started in basically 2018. And what happened in 2018, of course, is True North came on stream. Now that's one building. One would not think that would make a major difference, but it does. It was 300,000 square feet on a total square footage of leasable space in the Class A of 1.8 million. It's a significant increase. And one would also say, well, an increase in supply doesn't necessarily mean an imbalance. Demand should increase as well. And to be honest, I mean, back at the time when they were talking about True North, there was a lot of people, including myself, who thought we would see this net new tenancy come in for this significantly better building. It's a double A. It's completely different than the other Class A buildings. But that didn't happen. What happened is that they attracted tenants from other buildings. And what that did is disrupt the supply-demand imbalance. It's just one factor. The other factor is something beyond my ability to explain, but the net new tenancies in downtown Winnipeg have decreased since the early 2010s, when we're seeing quite a bit actually for Winnipeg. So the effect is what we call a tenants market. And that's what we have entering through 2018 and 19. And you can see the effects even from the city study, and we come up with the same conclusions. What this means is that the tenants have the bargaining power, they have the leverage, and landowners are having to basically meet their demands. And it becomes like a musical chairs in the market. You know, I could go through many of the leases and tell you, well, that tenant came from that building and that tenant came from that building. We're in a fortunate position actually at this point, because now Altus represents all of these buildings. And I take a lot of time, not only in doing, not just me, the entire team, doing similar studies every cycle, but we don't just look at the what, we try and understand the why. And we interview owners and we find out what's actually happening. And we find out that yes, it's costing much more in tenant inducements to attain a market rent of, or a net rent of over $18 a square foot. So it gives a little bit different perspective, but that being said, or that notwithstanding that, we come to page 2. And again, we've done a similar study, looking at the years coming up to the reference date. And there's a few important points about what I just described in the market, softening and becoming a tenant's market, is that the assumption that a step-up rent negotiated in a previous year, when it steps up, would be indicative of the market at that time, is often true in Winnipeg. In fact, 4 years ago, I'd say, yeah, that's pretty much the case, because everything was fairly static. But if the market were to escalate more than the parties imagined at the time of signing the lease, that step-up would be below market. The opposite is true as well. The market softens, that step up is now above market. And that's why when we're trying to understand the market sentiment in a given year, I disagree with including step up rents. And so that's one area where the city and Altus disagree. So what you see on page 2 is our summary in 2019 and 2020 of the actual leases negotiated. And these could either be new, and when I say new, I don't mean net new. Almost every one of these leases are tenants from other buildings. It's this mass musical chairs and a kind of a competition between the buildings to attain occupancy. Or renewals, because a renewal typically is going to be a new meeting of the minds, typically, not always. It can be a renewal that's stipulated in the previous lease. So we look at that, and of course we have about half as many leases signed in the years as what the city would have, including step-ups, and our conclusions are different. You can see that on the top of page 2, the weighted average for Class A, according to our analysis in 2020, is $17.99. Because we're not including step-ups, and we're taking care to make sure that semi-gross or gross leases are netted down, and that units that are not indicative of office space are removed. We do the best that we can with that, and a number of other factors. So if we were to say then, well, let's include step-ups. Okay, we can include step-ups for a different exercise, and that is what is actually being paid in the marketplace in that year. And that's also a very valuable exercise. But as I alluded to in the questioning, if we're doing that exercise, we need to look at all of the leases. And there are 190 approximate Class A office leases. We've done that. And I'll walk you through that in a moment, but the conclusion of that analysis of rents paid in 2020 is a weighted average of $18.18 a square foot. So you can see why the concern and why there's been a number of questions back and forth between Mr. Pohl and myself over the last number of hearings, is that how do we start with the same data but come to different conclusions? And I'm not pointing fingers. It's easy to do. It's very easy to do because there's a lot of data. But I'm trying to be very careful to get very clinical about what we're looking at.
Can I just interrupt for one moment?
Sure.
I didn't have a chance. This is the same as the study you did last time, but it was the first chance I got to look at it last time. This is the second chance. How much is this is new data, new analysis, or rebutting mine? Because it seems like you did another analysis rather than rebuttal.
Oh, no, this should be exactly the same as what we had last Tuesday.
Right, and I didn't get a chance to fully review that, so now I have had a chance to fully review it. How much of this study seems to be rebutting my evidence, or did you do a completely new analysis? Because it seems like you did a new analysis.
Well, it's an analysis to rebut the conclusions of your study. So I'm looking at the same data. So I'm rebutting your conclusions. Good. Okay. Thank you. So the other thing that we try and do, and this is rather awkward, Madam Chair, because this data is, we're in a public forum, and so I had to talk to the clients and say, look, we may have to expose some things here. And it's an uncomfortable position, but they accepted that idea. So what we've done is we're exposing it, everything. Now, first of all, if you look at the middle of page 2, I do the same exercise with the city's data. And even then I came up with a different conclusion. This was including the CRA, semi-gross lease, et cetera, And so I'm not sure about the math because I come to 1956. I could be wrong, but anyway, I did the same exercise because I just wanted to walk through what was happening in the city's data. And then I said, we have a clear outlier with what I believe is a non-arm's length lease at Stantec. And so I thought, what happens if we eliminate 311 Portage? Just to say, how much is that skewing the numbers? And you can see that at the bottom. The weighted average goes from 1956 to 1816. So yes, we have different conclusions. On the next few pages, Madam Chair, what I do is take the 3 main Class A buildings, the 3 at the corner here, and we expose exactly what rents were signed in 19 and 20. So the board can see exactly where we're getting our numbers from. So I'll talk a moment on page 3. And I'm trying to keep apples to apples because Mr. Pohl had mentioned he draws the line at the end of 2020. And for this part of the analysis, I draw the line at the end of 2020. But I'm going to go past that line, and you'll see that in a couple minutes, because that line should not exist in an analysis of the market at April 1st, 2021. But to be apples to apples at this point, we go through the 3 buildings. 360 Main, there are 2 leases signed, negotiated in 2020. And you'll see in red where through my interviews with owners, I have learned what the owners had to do in every case. And I do this not just to pick on high leases. I look at anything that seems out of the norm and try and understand what's happening. And this is completely corroborating what I said at the very beginning. We are in a tenant's market, and owners are having to spend more and more to get face rents, which seem to be equal to the past. So the first rent negotiated in 2020 for 360 Main was at $20 a square foot. And let me be clear, every rent practically that you see here, unless I note otherwise, has a tenant inducement or landlord work. Where I noted in red is where it's over $40. In some cases, that number can go up to as high as $100, which I shook my head when I first heard it. I could not believe that that was the case, because in 20 years of analyzing buildings like this, I typically think that $50 is high. That's how much things have changed. So the second lease is a tenant that was enticed from Richardson Building over to 360 Main. And in enticing them, they had to present a TI investment of over $100 a square foot over the term, which in this case was 15 years, because that's the one thing that the owner's demand is, despite lease terms shrinking in this uncertain environment, if they want the TIs, they have to get a longer term. And so in this case, it's 15 years, but it's $100 a foot. And the face rent is $1,650 for about 20,000 feet. So our weighted average in 2020 is $1,779, which is significantly different than the city's $1,920, assumed because they're including step-ups, which again would be fine maybe if we had a fairly stable market. But that's not what the data is telling us. That's not what I know is happening. The lease in 19 was actually quite high at $22 a square foot. It did have TIs. They were moved from another space in the building. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, Madam Chair. I leave this here for the panel's reference, but we do this exercise for each of the buildings, the three. And again, I've noted where the rents that I know they have significant TIs, not just TIs, but significant. And in each case, our conclusions are going to be different than the city's, which is why I've raised a big flag about the study. So the next 2 pages have 201 Portage and 375 Main. And lastly, on the final pages, pages 7 on, is every Class A rent as of April 1st, 2021. Everyone exposed. And I expose them as they are paid. And that means if they're inflated by landlord inducements, I'm showing it as the face rent that they're paying. I note it in red when it's a significant amount of tenant inducement. When the lease is non-arm's length, as you'll find in the Richardson building, about a third of the building is the Richardsons. So it's a non-arm's length situation. I've exposed them. I put them in purple. And where we have cases where a rent actually has an annual rent credit, not a free rent, an annual rent credit. And this is a case where, and this is the rarity now, where the tenant actually paid for their improvements. And in return, the owner said, okay, you're putting in a lot of money, so we'll charge you, we're not having to pay it, so the rent will be less. But we're not going to have your face rent show that because we prefer not. So we'll put the face rent at X and we'll give you a $9 per year credit. And so you end up paying the lesser amount. And that's what happened. And that's what I'm showing here because that's what's being paid. Anyway, that's only one lease, so it's not a big deal. But the point is, this is the Class A market exposed. And we come to a different conclusion than the city. Our weighted average with all of the rents here is $18.18 a square foot. What is different about these pages, Madam Chair, pages 6 on, is as I mentioned, I now am looking at the marketplace as of the reference date. And I'm going to pause here because I'll talk more about this in direct, but I'll just leave it for the panel's consideration at the moment. That one of the big things that happened as of January 1st, 2021, is the CRA lease that was alluded to earlier in questioning was superseded. They now moved over all of their employees from 325 Broadway. And before that, actually, they went to the market and said, we're taking our 63,000 feet, we're adding another 62,000 approximately for all of our new employees. We're consolidating the space. Who's going to make the best offer? And now the artist building, 360 Main, was in a competition to retain that rent that we discussed earlier, that semi-gross rent of 63,000 square feet. And they won. They won at the end of 2016. The lease was signed that would commence at January 1st, 21. So this is known. Everybody knows this is going to happen. It's certainly known as of the reference date. And the rent for 133,000 square feet was $16.45 a square foot. And I mentioned to you before, almost every case of a provincial or federal lease will be on a semi-gross basis. That is true. And the erosion is pretty typical for, well, in this case, federal usually gross actually. It's about $5 a square foot that they do not pay in camp. And that's clear on the rent roll. I don't even have to see the lease. But I always interview the parties or the owner or client to make sure I understand this correctly. I said, that is 1645 didn't strike me as odd because that was a little higher than what you had for the 63,000 feet. But this nets down to 1145, the Class A building. She said, yes, that's what the meeting of the minds determined. That's what CRA was willing to go to, and others would have gone lower. To get that 1145 net, they had to put in over $4 million of landlord work and over $5 million of tenant inducements. It's extraordinary. But I have confirmed this is the reality of the marketplace. And the second point is, and this is very important for our discussion today, it reflects economies of scale. If you want to fill the majority of the lower half of your building, this is the lower half of 360 Main, which has had chronic vacancy issues before. If you want to fill that and guarantee it's filled, the tenant's in the driver's seat in that negotiation. So it's real. And I think it's very interesting for today's discussion because it is the most recent lease of a Class A building in our discussion at the reference date. And it clearly displays the effects of economies of scale. I will end the rebuttal there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Pohl, any questions?
Yeah, this seems more in line with a new study rather than rebutting my information, but we can go with that. I just want to ask a few questions. I guess we can tail off what we just did there. $11.45 or so for 360, correct? Correct. Now, again, you just said that the ownership group paid for the tenant improvements for the building.
Yeah.
So that's even further rose it down from $11. Do you not strike that as considerably odd?
No, what it strikes me as is.
When they're advertising $21 to $22.
Yeah, but asking rents don't mean anything, especially in this area.
But what about the rest of the building that they're actually achieving?
Well, there's significant
Did you go to-
TI,
did you
number
go to-
one, trust me, I've come through this building very carefully.
Just please answer my question. So
Yeah.
I went through the rent roll in its totality, right?
Yes,
You've seen every other CRU and what they're paying,
yes.
right? So why would this building owner pay out all that money, get an anchor tenant that's effectively gonna pay less than what you're indicating, $11 a square foot, which produces like a less rent than a C-class building? When other property tenants are paying 21, 19, in around that range, triple net.
Two main factors. Number one, the higher rents, yes, that you find in the building are on the upper floors. There's smaller spaces. Typically a floor, many of those tenants are going to be law firms and such, some have multiple floors. But the rents that they attain on those floors as well are highly inflated, especially in 360 Main. And we see this in your evidence actually that we'll be talking about tomorrow from the permits. Highly inflated by the tenant inducements. They're paying considerable dollars to make sure that they keep those flagship tenants in the quality floors. The lower part of the building has been a problem for this owner since the days that I was in the building when we were at Deloitte. It's been a problem to lease. And so from an owner's perspective, actually, and this is, I interviewed them on this item. Does this make sense? 100%, because they now have a 15-year lease occupying, well, I'd say it's about a third of the building, the toughest floors to rent. And in this market, and this is the point, Mr. Pohl, I think you're not seeing what's actually happening in the market from 2018. It is extremely competitive. At 201 Portage, one of the leases that they had to attain, Taylor McCaffrey, again, these are all tenants coming from other buildings.
I just asked you about 360.
Yeah.
But I'm explaining what's happening in the market to explain, because you're asking me, do I think it's odd? And I'm answering no, and this is why. I spent considerable time interviewing and going through each of these leases and understanding what's happening.
Getting on to my next question.
And that rent was a net effective of $2 a square foot. That one seemed odd.
Okay, yeah, Mr. Slaughter, if you could just answer the question posed, thank you.
Obviously, you stated multiple times that it includes AIs, you're including DIs. You actually took TIs into account. We've been over this topic many times for the last couple of cycles. On my page 59 through 61, we have multiple orders from this course that we don't include tenant inducements of any kind to reduce market value, rent, expense, whatever. Do you have a single order to produce before the panel today, myself, that indicates that case law exists that does allow that?
So, sorry, let me just understand the question, because to be clear, I'm not asking the board to deduct tenant inducements from any of these leases. I'm explaining that some of these leases will be high because of tenant inducements.
So you're just taking it off of what they're holding out to us.
Yeah, I'm trying to explain, like I've gone through the trouble of trying to understand what's happening in the market.
Next question would be, you got into when does the lease start? It's not being reflective of market. I don't want to get into my question in view, but you and Altus as general have typically used older rents at will. Correct? Contract rents. You have it in your briefs today on page 13. You have a number of leases which predate 2015.
Oh, yeah, sure. As I say, it depends on the exercise we're trying to complete. If I'm trying to look at what's happening in the market, I will definitely look at many leases. And if I'm looking at that lease, I'm not going to look at the original rent paid. If they stepped up, I'll be considering the step up. And certainly when valuing that property, I mean, that's the rent that the owners, the purchaser is buying. But my point is that is not indicative of a meeting of the minds at that date.
So in other words, when the assessor brings in a full marketplace and shows the rents that are in place for all the marketplace leading up to it and allows the board to make their call on that, you feel that's inappropriate, but yet Altus can pick and choose when it's more appropriate.
I didn't say it's inappropriate, Mr. Pohl. I said, depending on the exercise, if we're looking at what's happening in the market, you look at step ups. If you're trying to say to the panel that we're looking at market behavior in a given year, which seems to be implied by segregating each year, then I would be cautious about using step-ups.
Okay, I wanna cut it short, but to major to the point. You spoke to True North, you used True North as a comparable, you represent True North. You clearly know the financials involved with True North.
Actually, our firm represents True North. I don't personally work that building. It's
You don't
Carrie
work that
Reimer of our office.
Okay, that's what I was trying to carry works. I'm sure you guys had discussions. That is a LEED Gold building, is it not?
I'm not sure. I mean, most of these buildings will have multiple
Ron,
bronze.
but it is better than, so you redacted that out of this here.
Well, it's not part of your study, so it's a rebuttal.
But did you did a rebuttal to the OFA marketplace? You chose not to include that here. So are you saying that you agree that True North is superior to the rest of the typical OFA market?
Well, no, to be clear, my rebuttal can't include it because it's a rebuttal to your evidence. If you're asking my opinion on True North versus the rest of the market, I think it's clear it's a double A, not
Yeah.
an A.
And this hydro building is further superior to that. It's the only building in Canada that LEED Platinum, multiple awards, best building, most environmentally and friendly, sustainable, cost down building in the nation.
Well, that's where we disagree. I think it's a fantastically efficient building. I think it's amazing for our city. But the question being posed before the panel today is, what is the market value? And from that perspective, I do not at all think it's a superior building. And I'll go through that in my direct.
Let's review it a different way. Do you feel the costs associated to occupy this building, not just net rent, but the effective cost of paying the utility side is not superior to anything in this country?
Yeah, the exact math is it would be using an average utility rate, this would be $1.75 a square foot less than typical Class A.
So wouldn't it be inclusive that the two newest buildings be more in line?
Not at
Or
all.
should be included in the study that you're providing?
Not at all. I can say this for direct, but this building was built for the goals and objectives of Manitoba Hydro as a utility company. It's not built at all based on market standards. I think the best evidence of that is that as impressive as this building is for its efficiency, if this was going to become a market gold standard, other buildings after would be built like it, and there aren't.
Quite frankly, I don't think they're the markets. I don't think they could possibly build this building multiple times over.
Exactly, that's my point.
Not-
The market wouldn't
not-
sustain it.
Not for that reason, though. I think it would be sustainable. It's just the fact that this is the first out of the gate. So anyways, other than the Richardson building, why are you using the Richardson building's leases that are non-arm's length? You have them purple, but I don't have black and white on mine. So why would you even be including those there?
Well, as I said, I'm trying, based on what you've presented as evidence, I'm trying to show the panel what those rents actually
But I
are.
didn't include any arm's length tenancies at Richardson.
I think you did. You had Windham Insurance, which is the Richardsons. You had Tundra Oil, which is the Richardsons.
Anyone where they check out is not owner occupied, we would be using if it's owner occupied and they're not checking it off. Okay. Fair enough. That's all the questions I have. I'll do the rest of the rest.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre,
I have no questions, thank you.
Mr. Mann,
No, I have no questions, thank you.
and I do not either. So, Mr. Slaughter, I think you can proceed with your presentation.
Okay, thanks very much, Madam Chair. So we have the direct evidence, looks kind of like the last one, but it states Manitoba Hydro place on it. Just let everybody turn to that. So I'm not just going to read from the brief. Mr. Polo has described the property quite well. What I will do is ask you to maybe turn to some pictures starting on page 19. And I'm going to walk through a property description in a very brief way that will kind of summarize the main points of our discussion today. I've had the pleasure of working for Manitoba Hydro around this building since 2015. And I remember the first time that I had a chance to inspect the property, I was amazed. I was amazed by what they accomplished from an engineering standpoint as far as efficiencies. But I was also amazed by how different it was than a typical office building. Let's be clear. This building was designed with the objective in mind of efficiency. As Manitoba Hydro is a Crown Corporation, market value was the last thing on their mind. The design of this building is not at all, it's not ideal from a market standpoint. The costs that were incurred for this building were because it was almost kind of test and go scenario. They were venturing into territory that really hadn't been done before in 2007, 2008. There's some quotes from the city's brief actually on page 8 where they talk about, this would place the cost of building much higher than local building developers would typically target for a city that is not expanding rapidly. The market would never pay this to build. The market was also, the building was also financed internally with a target construction payback period of more than 60 years rather than a much shorter typical return projection. And during the initial phase of construction in 2006, engineers discovered a higher water table than anticipated, as the basement had originally been designed to accommodate numerous mechanical systems. The building underwent substantial redesign, including its foundation. So they kind of started off and then had to back up and start again, and the cost escalated the whole time. The end result was that what was supposed to be at least two level parkade ended up being one. So we have 150 stalls for a building that accommodates about 2,300 employees. From Hydro's standpoint, that's fantastic because they want to entice people to use public transit or biking or walking. But from a market perspective, that is not an asset. So we have pictures on page 19, and the way the building's designed, I think it's fascinating. And I'm not going to do it justice in trying to describe it third hand because I'm not an engineer, but I still think it's fascinating. If you look at the building from the top, it looks like an A. And the base of the A, or the widest point, is facing south. And the reason is that it captures the maximum amount of solar energy from the southern exposure. And then they take the airflow into that south side, and they pump it into what they call the lungs of the building. And these are 3 atriums, 6 stories each, that go up. The air comes in, and they humidify the air, and then they pump it through. Not an HVAC system. There's no HVAC in this building. It goes through the floor vents and then it comes up. So the air is coming upwards instead of being forced down. Fascinating. But right off the top, what was explained to me is that the building had to be 18 stories, whether or not they needed it to be or not, because it's 6. They needed that height, which would be 6 stories for each atrium. So right off the top, the design is not even based on what they require for occupancy. It's based on the efficiencies. Please do not get me wrong. I'm not criticizing it. I am amazed by this building. But again, our objective today is to determine what the market's perception is or would be of this building. So when you go into a typical floor, you'll see this on the bottom of page 19. You'll have this kind of raised flooring where the vents are underneath. And the ceiling is exposed concrete because you don't have any drop tile ceilings to hide HVAC. It's just open except for sprinklers. Interesting, not the most finished space, and this is where it is very different than high quality Class A. But one of the implications of that, and I remember hearing this back before I even worked for the building, but it was reiterated many times, including on Wednesday when I was there, is that you can hear a conversation on the far side of the building because the sound just reverberates around the whole floor. On page 20, we see what is the only office space to ever be leased in the property. So on the second floor, it was a dental design and a chiropractor, and they occupied space that basically fronts Portage Avenue on the second floor, right on the walkway. I'll talk about this again a bit when I go through the market rent analysis, but I'll pause here because this is interesting. In about 2010 to 2012, Hydro said, we can lease some of this space. And they tried leasing a good part of the second and third floor for office. No one was interested. This dental design chiropractor took occupancy. And the rent that they ended up negotiating to pay, and this is very important because the argument today is that, well, it costs so much and it's so efficient that the market would pay more. And my point is, I really don't think so. And my evidence is right here. They couldn't lease it, and when they did lease the space, it was leased at $15 a square foot. That stepped to $16 a square foot. That's basically, at the time in line with market, if not a bit lower. That's the only rent in the building, and that's an arm's length transaction. Then we have some photographs of the interior space, the foyer, the truck dock on the main level, the parkade, which is again only one level. And then on page 22 at the bottom, you see an upper floor. It's relatively Spartan. And another reason it's relatively Spartan is the floor plate is designed specifically to accommodate the efficiencies that we discussed. It's engineered for the efficiencies. It's not engineered on a typical floor plate. So you have these kind of long wings of the sides of the A, and then you have a lot of common area in the middle. And the ratio, of square foot to people for this building, or spaces, or for people in spaces, sorry, is, sorry, I have the number here. Uh, 285.52 square feet per occupant. And this is because the space is not efficiently laid out. And I can tell you, as an occupant of a Class A building, I look at these kind of stats often. I'm also told them many times by our head office what we should be at. And people typically now aim to be at about 100 square feet per person. That's not usually attainable unless you're in Toronto in small cubicle or small workstations, but you're definitely hovering around 150. So this is what my conclusion is. It's a inefficient floor plate design, again, because it's not designed for market standards. So that's kind of the overview of the building, Madam Chair. And there was a great difference in the actual leasable area, but Mr. Pohl and I had a chance to work that out last cycle, so we have no concerns there. So what we're left with is Class A building that is extremely efficient, but not at all designed to market standards. And we can see that the market doesn't really, they won't pay more for just the efficiency. Sure, the costs and the recoveries might be a bit less, but that's only one part of the CAM. The taxes are actually higher here anyway. But it has been proven that they're not going to pay more. The leases in place for the main floor restaurants and retail are not above market. In fact, in some cases, they're below market. We'll talk about that later this morning. So we've gone into an analysis, Madam Chair, on page 13. And overriding this entire analysis is the understanding that the market has drastically changed since the last reference date. I haven't even begun to talk about the biggest change as of April 21, and that is we entered a pandemic and the change in people's use of office space changed. That's something we'll talk about a bit later in capitalization rate. But in any event, the market has changed by April 21 from what it was before. I read a quote on page 13. This comes from the Collier's Winnipeg Office Market Report for Q1 21. And they state, in general terms, rental rates remain relatively flat, but lease inducements have increased, compressing net effective rents in Winnipeg CBD. This is exactly what I was talking about. It's the number one symptom of what we call the tenants market. A factor that we need to consider in applying a market rent to all 24 floors of office space, because this is designed as a single occupant building, is the principle of economies of scale. And I think this is not a principle which is under debate. It's a known factor that we have to consider. And that is that all of the things being equal, larger areas command lower per square foot rates or values. This comes from a recent municipal board order, very recent, just this year. Has to do with the space at 444 St. Mary, which was occupied by Great West Life. And they had about 100,000 square feet over multiple floors. And this is a quote from the board. Though the assessor did not make any adjustments for the economy of scale, nor for the location, the board is of the opinion that economies of scale should be a factor. Generally speaking, this would mean the larger the space, the lower the rent. So as much as I have a concern with some of the conclusions from the overall market analysis, again, we're a little bit different. I think the most important point is we can't take a bunch of rents from other Class A buildings of various sizes and say, aha, this is what will apply to the hydro tower. We've looked at larger spaces in the market, multiple floor spaces. So on the bottom of page 13, we have 11 leases. And the very first was actually mentioned in the rebuttal, and that was KPMG, the accounting firm, moved over from the Richardson building to 360 Main. And with a tenant inducement of over $100 a foot over a 15-year term, they paid $16.50 a square foot. That's a fairly recent rent in a Class A building, but for about 20,000 feet, not 500,000 feet. And we go up in size from there. Number two is at the Richardson building. It was PwC. They have multiple floors, 25,000 feet, and their rent stepped to 18. So again, for the reasons I described earlier, we still look at that, but we give it a little bit less weight. It's not recent. Number three is BMO, enticed from 200 St. Mary over to 201 Portage. It's a continuous thing that you'll see in these leases. There's nothing net new. It's pulling from other buildings. And that's a 201 Portage, multiple floors, just under 30,000 feet, signed in February 2020, $20 a square foot. Number 4 is the TD Bank, enticed over from 201 Portage over to 360 Main. And they have multiple floors, 31,000 square feet, signed in mid-2018. That's $16 a square foot. They really got a deal when they came over to 360 Main, especially on their main floor or the concourse level bank. Number 5 is BDO. Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I said number 3 I said was BDO, it's BMO, it's Bank of Montreal. Number 5 is BDO, enticed from 200 Graham it was, to 201 Portage. They have multiple floors, 32,000 feet, signed in late 2020, $19 a square foot. Number 6 is healthcare pension fund. I believe they're at 200 Graham. They have 35,000 feet. January 2021, and they're paying $17.75 a square foot. Number 7 is Fillmore Riley at 360 Main. They have just under 40,000 feet. They were originally paying $17 on this rent, but they had a significant tenant inducement for their renewal, and they ended up paying $22 from that point forward. Number 8 is Taylor McCaffrey, enticed from 400 St. Mary to 201 Portage. Their rent is $16.50 a square foot, and that's the one that I mentioned. Their TI was also over $100 a foot. It was the largest TI investment to date at that moment, and their net effective ended up being about $2, just over $2 a square foot. A necessary move for a building that was in a lot of trouble. 3 more. 360 Main is Lloyd Touche, enticed from the Richardson building. 40,000 feet, signed at $17.75 a square foot. Second last is Aikens at 360 Main, renewed with significant TI at $23.50. They're on the top floor, 60,000 feet, but with a significant TI to get that. And lastly, and I think the best example, CRA negotiated in late 2016 for 133,000 square feet in 360 Main, a Class A tower. Rent commences January 1st, 21 for $16.45 a square foot, semi-gross, netting down to $11.45, notwithstanding TIs and landlord work. What we see here, Madam Chair, is clear evidence in my mind that the larger the space, the lower the per square foot rent. And I think that one of the best indicators of what's actually happening in the market right now is that CRA lease. But of course, I'm not proposing we use that for hydro. The dental office I mentioned is the only example of a lease that was signed in the tower. That would be representing the market's impression of the building's efficiencies. And they paid $16 a square foot for 2,000 square feet. Again, I'm not proposing we use that as an indicator. But what I am proposing is when you look at all these factors, I think number 1, it's inappropriate to use just an aggregate average rent for typical Class A space when you're looking at 500,000 square feet of a single occupant building. And number 2, the economies of scale is evident in our comparisons. And I think that the applied market rent for the city is applied is far in excess of what the market would pay for this much square footage. I think I'm being actually quite conservative in my application of $18 a square foot over the 517,000 square feet. The vacancy allowance, we concur with the city's conclusions. We've done the same analysis. I didn't touch on it in the rebuttal, but you'll see that we went through the exact same analysis of all the vacant space and came to the exact same numbers. And that is the vacancy in the market. So we're not contesting the city's application of a market vacancy allowance. It's reflective of what's happening. Shortfall rate. You'll recall that the city study shows that shortfall for Class A is usually about, and this is, just to be clear, this is the recoverable expenses, taxes and CAM. It usually hovers around $19 a square foot. The subject property up to 2020 was sitting at around $8,287,000. It was less in 2020 because of course it was shut down, but typically from 2017 to 2019 they hovered around $8 million. And that comes in at an amount lower than the typical Class A. Comes in at $14.85 a square foot. We recognize that the efficiencies have allowed the CAM charges to be about $1.75 less. I talked about that math earlier. So that's one of the main reasons why the expenses are going to be less in this property. And so I typically would argue that the city is too low at $15 a square foot when the market clearly is around 19. But in this case, we've redone our math based on the actual performance of the property, and we're using a shortfall rate lower than the city. So this is increasing our value. And we use $14 a square foot. And that is because we're reflecting the reality of the property. It's an efficient building. I'll pause there, Madam Chair. We now go into two separate studies around non-recovered expenses and the capitalization rate. And I know that the panel, everybody on this panel has heard this now at least multiple times. So I can gladly turn to that and walk through it, or I can give you the Coles Notes summary now.
Is the panel okay with the Coles Notes?
I'm okay with it.
I'm fine with it, thank you.
Yeah, I am as well, so, yep.
Thank you. So one of the big disagreements between the city and ourselves since 2020 is around the concept of, or the application of a non-recovered expense allowance. And, you know, you break this down, it's got a component that covers structural reserve, that's capital improvements over the life of the building, amortized to a typical amount. And the majority of that allowance was to reflect what we'll call non-recovered management costs. And basically, these are all the expenses that an owner incurs over the life of the building that they can't recover from the tenants. And when we're doing a fee simple analysis, this is yet another allowance or expense that we have to consider. Just like for an owner occupied building, we don't apply zero vacancy or zero rent. For the same token, we have to recognize that if this were on the market, an owner would definitely experience these expenses. What are these expenses? Well, they're not management expense. The name can be misleading. Management expense is clearly a recoverable expense. But most leases, especially for office, will allow the owner to recover your main expense items, utilities, taxes, janitorial, cleaning, repair and maintenance, which is different than capital improvements, but it's the necessary maintenance of their systems to keep the tenants happy. The tenants are willing to recover that, pay recoveries. And management, that's typically a recoverable expense. But what is not recoverable are items like professional fees typically. And the biggest one, and others that can be included, but the biggest ones are space marketing costs. In the in the non-recovered study that I typically go through, there are quotes from appraisal texts, courses that I've taken over the years, and they're very clear that these are real expenses that you need to account for in some fashion. Space marketing costs are the number one that they refer to. Space marketing costs are basically the dollars that an owner has to spend to bring themselves to the occupancy that commands the value upon which we're basing our valuation, or commands the income, sorry. So they include the leasing commissions, and they're supposed to include tenant improvements, but that's a touchy issue. So again, to be clear, you will hear in the questions and the comments after that the municipal board has stated that they don't consider tenant improvements and leasing commissions. The question being posed to the board in every one of those cases, Madam Chair, was we'd like to deduct the tenant improvements from the rent. So remember when I was talking about CRA and I said that the net rent after making the deductions from the semi-gross rent was $11.45, and then there was a significant amount of tenant improvement. What was being asked of the boards in those cases is we'd like to further erode the face rent by the amount of the tenant improvements to bring us to a net effective rent. The board was 100% correct in saying, no, we will not do that, because an owner, or sorry, a potential purchaser buying that property would be fine with this rent, the face rent. That's why they stated that. That's a very different question than do tenant improvements or leasing commissions exist, and would an owner take that into consideration, or would a purchaser take it into consideration when determining the price to pay? It's not what they're asked. The second main point about those decisions is, Madam Chair, in every one of those decisions, a 7% allowance was applied for non-recovered expenses. In some cases, 8%. So, in our opinion, I think that we are being asked to reinterpret board decisions, which weren't really asking the question that we're asking today, which is, should a valuation consider very real expenses that appraisal texts tell us we cannot ignore, that the market shows us are real, and that other assessing authorities, frankly, have recognized? We went through a study of non-recovered expenses in that, and you've seen it before, but we conclude that of the sample size that we look at, you will see, when you include the right items, you will see non-recovered expenses that completely justify the 7% that we're proposing. If you look at any individual income statement, you may or may not see it. You will see sometimes that it's extraordinarily high because the building is going through a time of lease up. And there'll be other moments when the building's stable and you will see very little. And this is exactly why the assessment department originally had stabilized this amount. I think it was a wise move because otherwise you would have this in value, right? It'd be up and down depending on the point in the cycle of the building. The only argument, Madam Chair, for not including the non-recovered expenses is if it can be shown that the capitalization rates that you're using in your analysis are based upon not only the same rationale that you use for valuing the property, but are not inclusive of the non-recovered expenses. In other words, you have to be apples to apples. And this is where I would turn to our capitalization rate study. And maybe I will ask the board to do that because this is where I think our methodology at least comes together. So we have a document that was provided with the direct evidence called the Altus Group Capitalization Rate Study for Office. Does everyone have that?
Yes.
Yeah.
The one that says final reduced size?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Because of the first hearing that I had where I sent it all in and realized it didn't go through because it was too darn big.
Okay, I think we all have it, so go ahead.
Okay, you know what? My computer went dead, but I think I know it off by heart.
So you can plug in if you want.
Oh, that's okay. I've got it here. Thank you. Sorry, Madam Chair. I better just turn to that document so I know what page.
That's fine. We just proceed when you're ready.
Okay. Okay. A couple of points that I want to bring out from this study. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Yeah, I think everyone on this panel has heard something about this, but there's a few main points that when you're developing a capitalization rate for your analysis. Number one is you have to be careful about which properties you're looking at. And so we have some guiding legislation and methodology here, and we quote the IAA standards on page 4. That when you have partial interest sales, this is 5.4.2 of the standards. These transfers should not be used as valid sales without thorough testing, analysis, and documentation. That's when you have 250% interest being purchased. And similarly, acquisitions or divestments by large property owners that include multiple parcels should not be included. But we've kind of talked about that question. So what we're going to move to is page 5, where we talk about our conclusions last cycle on capitalization rates for Class A buildings. And we looked at the broker studies, which again, you have to be careful about the methodology. It has to be apples to apples. And so I don't believe, I can't guarantee, but I don't believe that when the brokers are determining, ballpark figures for cap rates, they're doing things in the exact same way that Mr. Pohl or myself would for a pretty simple analysis. And for that reason, we typically, we look at these, but we take a grain of salt with the conclusions of the studies. But anyway, they were ranging for Class A from 5.5 to 6.25. And we looked at the market. We tried to test various areas. There's not many Class A buildings that sell, so you can't just say, aha, there's the sale that tells us everything. And even if there was, one sale doesn't make a market. So we go through our analysis on page 6 from last cycle. And at the end of the analysis, we concluded that with all factors being considered, and at that time, the beginning of the tenants market showing, we concluded that 6.25 was appropriate for Class A. We brought that forward in our arguments to the board, and for the most part, it was accepted. And I'm not asking the board to refer to the past. I'm simply trying to explain our rationale. So then we bring ourselves forward to April 21. And the most important factor that's changed since April 20, because at April 20, the tenants market had begun. Supply of demand imbalance had started, and we started seeing the effects. So that's already included in our analysis. But what's happened since the pandemic doesn't necessarily affect the incomes of the office buildings because everyone kept paying rents. But what the pandemic did is show to businesses that you can do these things remote, and it showed to workers that you can work from home. And the result was the revolution that we all know now as the hybrid work model. And I'm not speaking in the future here. The point is that by April 21, people knew that this was coming. We actually, as Altus, undertook a study that involved the main players in Canadian real estate, pension funds, REITs, brokers, as many people as we could across all our divisions. I had a chance to participate in that study, actually. And we asked the market twice in June 20, which at the time no one knew what was happening, and then again in November 20, which is very close to the reference date. We asked, what do you think was happening? And I'll just go through some of the points, Madam Chair. I don't want to get too lost in a lot of this study, but page 10, I think, are very insightful conclusions or sentiments, sorry, from the market. And really, that's what we're trying to do, right? In an analysis, is we're trying to take a present value income and say, what's going to happen into the future? So the respondents were asked, do you think office tenants will downsize their space requirements in the future as a result of work from home? 57% said yes. We asked, what change in market rents do you forecast for the 2021 fiscal year? And for downtown in the light gray at the top, for top quality office across the country, this is, a lot of people said we think a decrease of 5%. It was the highest sentiment. Lower quality office, it was even a stronger sentiment for downtown office. But the most important one, I think, is on page 12. And I mean, this is an obvious conclusion when you look at everything that's happening in the office market. What do you think will happen to the higher quality office cap rates for 2021? And the vast majority of respondents, about 60%, in November, stated that they think it's going to drop, going to increase by 25 to 50 basis points and higher for lower quality office. So we have a market which is presenting uncertainty. We have a market that has become a tenant's market because of supply and imbalance, and then we have further uncertainty being brought forward. Then we look at the broker's conclusions on page 15, and this is as of the reference date. And again, there are no Class A buildings to say, aha, this is what's happening. So this is just sentiment in the local market or national market pertaining to Winnipeg. And basically they said, well, we don't think that there's going to be much change in the capitalization rates for Class A. I think that's an optimistic statement, but that's what the broker said. They did say for Class B that, yeah, things are going to change. The cap rates are going up 25 to 50 basis points. So then as the last step, we tried to go to the market to find any office buildings that did sell in this period. It's pretty hard, but there is one downtown that we looked at. And I think it's an interesting transaction because it really showcases everything that I've talked about this morning. 433 Main across the street is, in my opinion, a C+. Others may argue a B-, but in any event, it was an office building that went on the market as an office building. London Life was selling it. And they were not getting the interest that they would have expected a couple of years prior. The eventual purchaser recognized that there was a supply-demand imbalance in office and concluded that the highest and best use is to convert this building to multi-residential. I think that alone is a very interesting indication of the office market leading into coming close to the reference date. Anyway, we did an analysis on that property of the income in place at the time of sale that was being brought forward to market. And I'd like to bring your attention to this because this is where, Madam Chair, I'd like to think our methodology comes full circle on page 21. So when looking at a cap rate, we have to be careful. I mentioned this many times that we're doing things in the same way that we would look at the valuation of the subject property, apples to apples methodology. And that means that we don't look at the income statement and say, aha, the NOI was X at the time of sale, so the cap rate is Y. That's not a stabilized NOI analysis. So we do things the same way. We look at the contract rents in place and determine, are they representative of market? We have a number of criteria that will say that no, they're not, but if they are, we apply those as market. That's what's being purchased. And where market rents should supersede or be placed in, for example, for vacant space, we go to the market and do an analysis to determine an appropriate market rent. And we do that conclusion, and then we look to the vacancy experience. And we look to the stabilized vacancy leading up to the reference date. Vacancy in this property was at 24% for the most part and increased to 34% just before the sale. So we applied 20% in our vacancy allowance. You'll find in our presentations, we do exactly the same sort of analysis. And the most important point, Madam Chair, is right in the middle of the page, you'll see our shortfall based on actual performance and the non-recovered expenses. And we applied 5 and 2, notwithstanding they may have been more or less at the time on the income statement. That was an appropriate allowance to apply. We added storage income and then we did the math. And the capitalization rate came to 7.66%. And number one, that does show us that even what the brokers were saying for this class of building is likely on the optimistic side. And number two, if you look across from the 7.66, we have the cap rate if we had only used the 2% non-recovered at the time. Cap rate would increase to 8.818%. So this is very important. And this is what I asked the panel now, coming back to the non-recovered. That once we conclude our capitalization rate, which is based on our interpretation of the market, including an allowance for non-recovered expenses, we either ask that the board applies the non-recovered expenses in this analysis of the valuation of the subject property, or increases the capitalization rate by 25 basis points. Because again, you can't ignore this reality. You either see it in your NOI, or the potential purchaser would recognize it in their risk going forward, i.e., they recognize it in the cap rate. I think I'll stop there, Madam Chair, on the cap rate study and bring us back to the directive, if I can. Okay.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So where we left off was on page 15. We kind of took that side road when we started talking about non-recovered, which dovetailed into cap rate. But the point was that we need to look at this as a whole, and then we come back again. Our conclusions on the capitalization rate. This was the hardest part for me of this analysis. Because we had argued last cycle, as I mentioned, for all Class A, 6.25%. And that was in April 18. And we're looking at a less stable. There's no way that anybody could say the office market in April 21 is more stable or as stable as it was in April 18. That would mean a higher capitalization rate. But what we've concluded is, to be very fair, that we are trying to recognize some of the realities of this property in the NOI, in the market rent, and in the vacancy allowance. And the last thing I want to do is be here trying to double count for factors. So long as we recognize the realities of the marketplace at April 21 in the NOI, I would accept the city's capitalization rate at 6%, which is actually less than last cycle. But with the caveat that if the board does not feel that the 7% non-recovered expense should be applied, then I strongly request the cap rate be applied at 6.25%. The last part of the analysis, Madam Chair, is the parkade valuation. Retail and parking were hit extremely hard during the pandemic, but I think the city has been fair in their applications of rents for parking. The cap rate already is at an escalated amount, which we agreed with previously. So long story short, we don't have a contention with the parking. I think the city has been very fair in that application. So on page 17, Madam Chair, we conclude, and really then the only difference that we're asking, differences are the market rent, which we feel quite strongly about, the non-recovered expenses, and we've actually decreased our shortfall rate, which heightens our value slightly. We agree with everything else that the city has done. So our value is $120,569,000. And I think that concludes our presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Slaughter. Mr. Pohl, any questions?
Yeah, I will, but given the time, it's gonna span longer than what we got for lunch. Would it be more reasonable to break for lunch now and then come back? I think it'd be best use of our time.
We could do that. What does the panel think?
I personally think we should go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, it does make it a little easier to remember. Like when you're questioning, it's going to make it a little easier for us to recall what Mr. Slaughter said if we do it now.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And we will break after the questioning for this. We'll take a break for sure for lunch. Yep.
All right, we'll just get into it then. I'm gonna go through it non-recoverable section first, then the capitalization rate, and then we'll get into the direct.
Okay,
The direct. So non-recoverables. How many of them are OFAs, and how many of them? How many of the comparables are OFAs that you looked at in your study?
I'd have to go back. I know that the Richardson building was one. I'd say one, maybe two Class A.
Okay, and how many of the residual next to the OFAs would be the Class B? How many of them would be in the study?
Not many. The study is an overarching study for all asset classes. So I think we had, it was 35 in our sample size. So there was probably 7 office in total. I can't remember exactly.
Okay. So you would agree that there's about 23 office properties, 7 of which are OFAs that are in the marketplace, correct? And you have access to all that as you represent virtually everyone.
Yeah.
So you could have done a more refined study similar to the assessors on just the OFAs, just the OFAs.
Yeah, we could have.
All right. Next question would be regarding your non-recoverables. You're clearly taking in what case law says we cannot. Right.
Nope, I disagree. I think we're talking about different interpretations of
I think it's
what the boards have stated.
pretty clear that the board's been through several dozen is no TIs, no tenant inducements, no free rent of any kind to reduce market value. You are including that.
We're recognizing non-recovered expenses. Can I answer it this way, Mr. Cole? There's really, it comes down to 2 interpretations of what the boards have said. They're being asked to deduct tenant improvements or free rent that was incurred earlier from a face rent to determine a net effective. And at the time, non-recovers were applied. So if we're correct in our interpretation of that, then what the board was saying is we're answering a different question. We're not giving you a net effective rent evaluation. There's already an allowance to recover for non-recovereds, and it's not appropriate to reduce face rents to net effectives in addition to that. If you're right, what the board is saying, we completely ignore the concept of space marketing costs. And therefore, basically, we're saying that we're going to heighten all assessed values by approximately 5% just because. That's a jurisdictional exception. And from my experience as an appraiser, jurisdictional exceptions have to be clear. They have to be very clear. This isn't clear. And to me, it's not logical. Why on earth, when the legislation states that we assess at value, would the boards, through cloudy language, say, just ignore that expense?
Yeah, I'll get into it a little bit more detail. You seem to only be taking the effective rents to reduce the net. But if you're putting in a large tenant inducements to improve the physical space, capital of the building, that would incorporate into risk being lowered because you don't have to pay that into the future. It's going to be done for your anchor tenants, typically, or when you're anchor tenants. And then as well, that would also be a reflection on the vacancy as well. If you have newer spaces that are should be more competitive in the market, be absorbed. So why would you only be looking at just the rent and not adjusting your vacancy, adjusting your cap rate if you're doing it from a market perspective? You seem to be ignoring that.
No, I tried to, maybe I didn't spend enough time on vacancy allowance, but I tried to say, well, first of all, we don't look at an owner occupied property with 0 vacancy because we are looking to market. We're looking over the life of the building and we use the current market as the barometer of what that overall vacancy allowance might be at this time. It's kind of a weird concept in that way, but
So
if it improves, we change it in the next assessment section.
just to make sure we hit on an equitability standpoint, and I'll get to the equitability in a moment. If you're TA, for example, for the entire marketplace hypothetical, all of a sudden you get $5 or whatever it is, off the net effective, you drop it from the base rents to equivalent. That's not going to continue on to the future over the span of long-term investment horizons.
Sorry, Mr. Fuller, to be clear, not once, and we wouldn't discuss it here because we don't have contract rents, but not once has Altus proposed that we deduct tenant improvements from face rents.
So I'm just saying if there is a dip, and arguably let's say there is, that's not something that on a long-term investment horizon you would consider continuous. That would come back up. And that's what you see in every single rent that's tenant induced. What I've been looking at with the sale produce that I looked at it, that it's low, they put in a face
okay,
rent.
you know what, gentlemen, we're getting into debate again. What's the question, Mr. Cole?
My question is, does it reflect in your vacancy? Does it reflect in your capitalization rate? You seem to only be reducing it from the net effective rent.
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that, Mr. Fuller. If we were talking about a property with actual leases in place, I could see where you're going with this. And to answer in that hypothetical, yes, we always look at everything together. We try to be very appropriate and objective in looking at everything about the property from a site-specific perspective. And remember, This is a site-specific valuation.
So moving on from that, I think we made our points for tenant inducements and then we have different positions. Moving on from that, capitalization rate. Do you have a cap rate for an all fee building?
No.
There was only one that was sold, which is 201 Portage. That sales has never been released, correct?
It is a share transaction of multiple assets.
It's never been released to the public, so we can't.
So-
look at it. The next direct evidences would be the 4 sales that I highlighted for the OFB class. I have 2 in, but I spoke to 337 areas of 175 already. Those are the last 4 that have sold anywhere near the reference date. There's been none relatively close to the reference date.
Well, there's been transactions, I guess we could say, but there's nothing that we can appropriately use. A lot of, for example, I mean, it's very clear from the IAA standards, we have to be very cautious about 50% interest.
So
And so would I look at a Class B sale from a decade ago that was 50% interest and has other things about the story as any indication for the cap rate today? Not for a moment.
okay, other than forecasting hypotheticals, do I have any direct, the only direct sales that have actually occurred are those sales, right? Better way about that.
The only, sorry, say it
The
again.
only direct sales that have occurred were those 4 sales to Commissioner
I can't answer that.
Getting into your actual sale that you used, your hypothetical sale for 433 Main Street.
Not hypothetical.
Let me phrase that. It's a hypothetical workup. You both went to that building. You argued that it was a Class C, it should be a C, and you argued that it was being converted over to multifamily. That was before it was known to the assessor. After becoming known to the assessor, that didn't happen.
No, I didn't argue that it was being converted to a multi-res. I was very careful about only staying to reference information, I believe, at the time of that appeal. And you're right, I felt it was a C, and the city felt it was a B.
B minus C. Argued. That purchase, that individual purchase for that value was not based on any office income stream moving forward. It was invested because they knew they were changing it over to multifamily and they knew the cost that would be associated with it. And
Okay,
also-
Mr. Pohl, again, what's the question for Mr.
My
Sullivan?
question is, why would you use that at all in your cap, knowing those facts?
Oh, I think it's a very indicative sale to look at, very much so, because an investor, including the purchaser who bought the building, is not going to pay $1 more than what somebody else would otherwise pay. And the fact is, it is a great barometer of what's happening in the market for office that there was very little interest. I mean, it could have been sustained as a Class C office building. It was about 60–70% occupied.
They purchased a building that was non-viable, had a non-viable income stream and converted it to something else. And you're transposing that to actual good indication marketplace.
Yeah, it was an office building on the market with a high vacancy. You see that happen all the time. Does that mean any building with a high vacancy is not viable as an office? Should we be changing our approaches on this?
When you are actually changing the building or investing that kind of sum of money, you're purchasing it for the low price that it was. That is exactly what happened there. And you're trying to put that across as market.
Yeah, I'm telling you what the income was in place that the rest of the market was looking at. And what the purchase price indicated from that income as a capitalization rate. Whether or not the purchaser determined that the highest and best use was something different, I think is irrelevant to the exercise that I'm showing here.
And just so we're clear, the subject property is a highly efficient, better than, you want to call it an A++, or you want to call it what it is, a LEED Platinum. It is a highly efficient world-renowned building.
Yeah, I think we got to be careful with words. So I think it's an extremely efficient building. I know it won awards in 2008 when it was constructed for its efficiency. To say it's a better building, I would not agree with in a second.
It's a LEED Platinum building. What you're using for cap right there is the C building that was in a detrimental state that it had to be converted over.
Oh yeah, I'm comparing the two.
So
I'm not comparing the two buildings. I'm simply saying what do we see in the marketplace for capitalization rates that allow us to understand the marketplace.
Okay, you spoke to, and we're getting into your actual workup now. You spoke to the efficiency of the building. Would agree that it's not just the utility cost, it's the overall bill that got the LEED Platinum. Sustainability of the building, the components of the building, their long-term cost, everything associated is at a level that's pretty much been unseen in this country.
Yeah.
Right. And that would be reflective of long-term investment in the capitalization as well. Meaning if it would be a higher risk to cost, you wouldn't get that certification.
No, I think we have to be very careful about the differentiation between cost, number one, and number two, factors which I think are extremely impressive, but that the market does not appear to value the same way. And if they did, Mr. Pohl, we would see this type of construction again and again. We would see other buildings converted to this kind of construction or to this kind of efficiency. And we would see rents indicative of what you propose to be the excellence.
So just so we're clear, everything that I've read in the literature, everywhere, sustainability, long-term, you're now seeing as far as capital needing to be put in is different from what's been reviewed. So I mean, if you're a purchaser, if you're an owner, you would expect a higher amount of capital costs needed to be invested in the R&M major expenditures in order to keep the building going, or did we go with the literature that says that is the most sustainable building in the country?
Well, I think it's always going to require improvements and capital improvements. It's a very efficient building. The utility costs are 70% less than the typical Class A, which I think is outstanding.
All right, getting over to, and I just want to touch base, your rents. You have 11 rents in your actual study. Aside from your rebuttal, which seems to be more evidence-based, new evidence-based, but in your actual 11 rents here, all your rents are either old rents or tenant induced, correct?
Yeah, so the exercise is in evidence, actually, including the rebuttal. I have every Class A rent exposed, everything.
Okay.
So the board's
But we're not talking
direct.
about the evidence that you put in place to rebuttal. We're talking just your brief.
In my direct, I focused on the largest leases because I felt it's inappropriate to be using just typical sized Class A offices for this extraordinary sized building
Okay,
space.
so let me review. Before you knew what was going to be released by the assessor for this hearing, you felt this 11 comparables based on large tenant inducements and other rents is more reflective of market.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, be careful. Some of these rents are inflated by tenant inducements, and I need to take that into consideration, like Aikens at 360 Main. I know what the tenant inducement was, and I know why their rent went from 17 to 2350. Do I think the 2350 is now indicative of a space that didn't have those inducements? No.
With that, I think that's pretty much all I'll ask. I do the rest, and I don't have the rebuttal without commentary. It's close the statement on this.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Pohl. Mr. McIntyre, do you have any questions for Mr. Slaughter?
I have no questions, thank you.
Mr. Mann?
No, thank you. I think it's been answered. Thank you.
Yeah, most of my questions are answered as well. I just, Mr. Slaughter, if this was to sell on the open market, because you're talking about, large blocks of space, do you see, because of the configuration of the building, that it would have to go to a single tenant?
Yes, I do. I mean, the best.
Could you explain why? Can you explain why?
Yeah. Number one, the floor layout is such that with the concrete roofs and the raised floor, it would be difficult to put in demising walls to provide privacy amongst tenants, multiple tenants on one floor. And I actually had that mentioned to me before, but I went back on Wednesday to walk through one more time and get that straight in my head. Why? Makes sense. The floor plate is not conducive to design for multi-tenant. But the question could be raised, could we then lease out each floor? Well, possibly. But I'd suggest that in a market such as ours, to lease out 24 floors of not ideal configuration would be difficult. But the most important point is that we have been told in other decisions that we assess the property in its current physical condition, which is a single occupant building. Because to assume that we could turn it to multi-tenant would probably require either A, an erosion of leasable area of some kind, or B, further landlord improvements in order to accommodate various tenants.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question. Mr. Pohl, you said you do not have rebuttal.
No, can I just have a follow-up to that since it was on the
Yes,
point?
you can. Yes, go ahead.
So as the building sits, I agree. The building sits essentially in 3 blocks with 3 atriums. Why couldn't it be leased to 3 tenants, 3 major acre tenants?
Well, it could.
A third, and a third, which puts it right into market.
Hypothetically, I think you would still need to have some improvements to make sure that there is
elevator, swipe card.
whatever it may be. But theoretically, yes, you could. But I think it's a hypothetical. So.
Okay, Mr. Pohl, you said you have no rebuttal, but so please proceed with the summation.
Basic, this is the best building in Canada. It's without question. It's one of the only it is the only LEED platinum building in Canada. There's a few in North America. It's world renowned. There's studies done on it. It's named best in the Americas. I can go on and on and on. It was done in a way that is sustainable. It was done in a way that it met long-term goals. Any reflection of that as far as capital investment and major expenditures would be reflected in risk, with also the costs associated with that. Clearly, that bar exceeds market. I'm not going to question that. As far as rents, we brought in a complete rent analysis of the marketplace, less one building, because that one building was not made available to the assessor. That would be True North. It's been mentioned multiple times. That building is double prime, if you will, and it's effectively at $30 triple net. That would be more in line with this building here. This is better than that building, although it is built for a utility company as its headquarters, as what we just indicated. Most likely, it's never not going to be anything but that. But were to put the marketplace in place, that would be the best indicator, as well as 311 Portage. I think at a $19.75 rent, we were doing a very conservative estimate. That wasn't True North wasn't made available to the assessor. If that would, the number probably would be coming in at a different value here today. So when we're looking at this building, this is, I've been through it, a small portion of it. You can't really go through the whole building in one tour kind of thing. But the floor plates that we looked at was very homogeneous. It is a very nice building. It is beyond market. Having said that, it should be at the peak of the market, especially when you add in the occupancy costs, the cost the tenant would be required to pay another market would be less, which again would increase your net effective rate. With all that being said, this building should receive the highest assessment per square foot in the city, simply because it is the best building. It's the best building in the nation. So when we're looking at it from a market perspective, at 138,476,000, I feel it very, very conservative. You can play with the numbers, say it's the rental rate should be $1 less or whatever, or a few dollars more. Realistically, the risk to this building, and if you were to buy it, the costs that are in place in the market that can be achieved in it, I think is very reasonable that we put in place. And realistically, just from a realism standpoint, it was $270 million that it cost around 2007, 2009 to build. To put it in at 42% below that in today's standard, I think it's outside of realism. It's not realistic, and it would never be sold for that price. So with that said, that's
Thank you very much. Mr. Slaughter, your summation, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do I think this is one of the most efficient buildings in Canada? It certainly was in 2008. I think it probably still is. Am I impressed by this building and impressed by its efficiency? 100%. I'm proud of Hydro for constructing this building. Do I think that translates into market value? Not at all. The evidence that I've put forward on as far as the market rent is concerned deals with large spaces, but they still are between 20,000 and 133,000 square feet. So they're not even matching the 517. So even if we assumed that maybe hypothetically we get multiple tenants and multiple floors, the weighted average was $18 a square foot. And we saw it per square foot decreasing with size. So I think from a market rent perspective, with the understanding that the market is not going to pay $1 more than they think than they need to for a space, I think the market rent is fair. I think that the best indication of all is if the assessor is correct and the wonderful efficiencies in this building do translate into higher market rents, we would have seen that when they were trying to lease the building, and we would see that in the leases that they did attain. And those leases are not above market. So in conclusion, Madam Chair, I think our value is very fair. But what I agree is a very impressive building.
Thank you very much. Okay, we will recess for lunch. It's 5 after 12. How long do people think you need? 45 minutes, an hour? 45, good?
Plenty for me, yeah.
Half an hour.
Well, if half an hour is good for everybody, it's fine with me. I just want to make sure that I know you have to travel out to get something. And Is
I'm
30
fine with
minutes
half
good?
an hour.
Hour's good for me.
Yep. I'll
Okay,
probably
let's,
just keep-
okay, let's come back at 12:35.
Can I sit in the keyboard? Because I can take my computer over there.
I'm not gonna head out. No, I'm not gonna head out either. I thought we should continue to just finish it.
The other should be quick, I think.
Yeah, they're like, honestly.
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting back to order, and we will go back up to the top of our docket for today and hear item number 1, which ends in roll number 800. And Mr. Pohl, please proceed when you're ready.
Roll number is 1209776080. It's for unit 2, 360 Portage. The 2023 assessment is for 968,000. Obviously, this is within the hydro building, as they all are today. The main docket we heard, the main deal we heard was for the office tower. This is tenanted spaces within the tower that they broke out. So it is all still within the buildings, but there are separate roll numbers for some smaller spaces within the building. So this is one of them. The leasable area is 2,824 square feet. It is the dentist office, which we spoke about, the agent spoke about it being the only one that was rentable. If we look on page 9, I believe I have a different tenant name. Dental Design is the one we had. Look on page 10 in the office, and obviously the reception area in the front page. We see the rents that are in place on the IE, although it indicates it's gross. I have as we go along through these are all X'd out. I don't believe they're gross, as we can see on some of the other fields I will be moving forward. So when I look at this from the IE, it appears that it is a $22.21 square foot gross rent, but again, I believe that should be net. And I'm not sure if the former tenant Dental Design, I believe they moved, and it looked like it was effective December 31st, 2021. And that's on the following page as well, page 15. It looks like they're not there anymore. So as far as the rent that's in place, it looks like it appears to be net to me. But also I want to point out that they just be renting space. Hydro would not have paid for the tenant fit up for this tenant. Typical for dentistry, they bring in their equipment, they bring in a lot, they finish it to the dentist's liking, so to speak. I don't think Hydro would have done this for a tenant and then have a tenant walk or leave, and then be stuck with a dental unit when it really, they can lease it to any for any reason. So I don't think that would be reflected in that. Obviously, the tenant paid for their own equipment to go in, so to speak. So when I looked here, we looked for overall the Winnipeg marketplace in better locations. OFM obviously is in Class A. We're not going to get into the building again. We know what the building is. For the marketplace, leading up, we have 46 comparables. We looked at around 112,000 square feet. We're using CRU is typical around 1,600 square feet. Your dental offices range from 1,000 to maybe 3,000 at most. I produced an average of $21.86, weighted average of $21.64, and a median of 22. So pretty tight. Look at it. The other thing I did look at as well. Then I looked at downtown on the following page, on page 4. Downtown offices. Where in a downtown building, Class A building, good building, is a medical tenant and office medical tenant, and what are they paying? So as you can see here, for the ones at 360 Main, 333 St. Mary's, 393 Portage, we have the leases that are in place. and that's 25.88 for an average. 25.92 for an average and $25 for a median. So when we look at the average that we put in here, it's gonna work up on page 5. For the area, we have $25.27. That was a model rate. I didn't feel the need to adjust it, and I mean it's right in wheelhouse of downtown concourse area type tenants, as well as just a bit above the marketplace, which you would expect given where location that it is. So from that point on, standard parameters apply, and they're all the same standard parameters that are within the Class A building. So it's not a difference of property type class. It's in the buildings within the Class A parameters at 10% for vacancy, expenses at 3%, non-recoverable $50 for shortfall, and a cap at 6% gives us our 968,000. So with that, like I said, these will go pretty quick. I'm open to questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Slaughter, any questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Poole, so you mentioned on page 11, they show the actual rent, $37.65 per month, and the leasable area being assessed is 2824 square feet. Is that correct?
2034 square feet for what they have.
Yeah. So the math on that is the 3670 or 3765 times 12 divided by 2824 is the $16, right?
I get 2221.
Try that again, 3765 times 12.
3765 and 33 cents times 12.
Yeah.
Divided by 2034.
No, but their leasable area is 2824, correct?
Look on what they're indicating.
Yeah, I know, but we're assessing them in the area that
They're showing what the lease rate is on the IE.
yeah, okay. The leasable area is actually 28.
Yeah, I know, but
Yeah.
what I'm saying is on the IE, what they're showing us, and you can see. Like
Yeah,
it's quite clear.
typo. It's
And again, it indicates that it's gross, which I don't believe it is.
no, it's 16 net.
Yeah, so again, there seems to be some issue with it being reported as gross when it's not. And you see what they're reporting at the areas.
So they pay 16 net, but we've looked to market instead, so we're not paying any attention to the actual rent notes. Okay. And on page 3, you have a listing of OFM rents, but these are all suburban locations, right?
On page 3, yes.
Yeah. So we would likely not put as much weight on those as we would on page 4.
It's a good indication as far as what a dentist would pay or a chiropractor or whatever would pay in outside market to this building or downtown. And then I redefined it by going into the downtown marketplace for better quality of the leads.
Yeah, because suburban rents are going to be quite different because they have space with parking.
Yeah, but you still have to, I mean, there's only a few downtown, so we have to look outside just to get a feel for the marketplace as a whole.
And of the ones that you list here, we've got, these are all either located in concourse or in the case of comparisons, 51 and 52, those are in Portage Place, they're retail locations, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that is all the questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mann, do you have any questions?
Just one with respect to the location. This is along the skywalk, or this is the second floor in the skywalk area?
Along the skywalk, it kind of goes around the building and it's on the skywalk around.
It's in the building.
Yeah, no, it's in the building. No,
Right,
but
yeah. It's on the north side of the
Yeah.
building facing Portage Avenue?
yeah.
Okay, thank
So
you.
I have technically in the building, but.
That's separate. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre, any questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. Any desire to summarize on this, gentleman? Or no, sorry, we have to hear Mr. Slaughter first.
But I will be very quick, Madam Chair. Yeah, no problem.
Sorry, Rod.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay,
Yeah,
Rod, please proceed with your presentation.
thank you. So just to confirm the location, yeah, it's located in the hydro tower at the facing Portage Avenue, and it is close to the walkway which goes across to Portage Place. So it's in that way it's accessible from the walkway. But in the hydro buildings, this is the one I mentioned as we're discussing the hydro tower. And the rent in place, this is what I mentioned, it's, because I think they made a typo on their area, but they're 24 square feet. The lease includes both the dental design and the chiropractic office, it's all kind of one. And they pay, I have the lease here, it's $15 for the first half, $16 for the second half of the rent. That's an arm's length rent for the space. I typically would put more weight on actual rents in place in the building, rather than look to other buildings. And this is something that has been mentioned by the municipal boards before, that rents in the subject property are probably a better indication of market than other buildings where you have to make adjustments for location, age, whatever the case may be. But in any event, we still look to the market on page 11. I was in the space Wednesday, and it's now vacant. The tenant had left at the end of the lease and it's sitting vacant. But we looked at the market on page 11 and done a similar analysis, but we are focused on downtown. I don't think suburban medical office rents are appropriate because of the fact that parking will be included in those and such. And we have, it's a similar analysis, but we have a slightly different set of comparisons. What we try and steer away from, Madam Chair, is ones that we feel are more truly a retail location. So Portage Place, second floor, where two of the city's comparisons are. Those are the highest ones, and it makes sense. It's a very high traffic retail location. So we're left with the comparisons shown here, which do include some kind of semi retail locations in the concourse at 360 Main. When it says basement, that means concourse. And then some units along St. Mary Avenue, which are good comparisons, I think. And then two more on Portage Avenue. And our rent average is $18.45 a square foot. So we looked at the actual rent that was paid in an arm's length transaction between two parties. We look to our evidence in the market, and we feel that $18 is a better indication of market value, or market rent, sorry, for this location. That's really the main difference, Madam Chair, between our positions, except for everything else we are applying just as we did with the tower. And that basically is the same as the city, with the exceptions that we have a lower shortfall rate, and we include the non-recovered expenses. But again, I leave it to the panel's discretion. Should they agree with the non-recovered expense allowance, then that would be the cap rate we'd accept 6%. But should you not agree with the non-recovered expense allowance, we would ask that the board then apply the capitalization rate, as with the tower, of 6.25%. The math works out pretty much the same. So on page 15, we have our valuation. We're using $18 a square foot for this space. And market vacancy, non-recovered expenses, shortfall, capitalization rate 6%, and our value is a little less than the city of $643,000. I think that concludes our presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Poole, any questions?
Just a couple questions, quick ones. You said that earlier in the actual tower appeal that this was the only space that rented out. This wouldn't be a good indication of office space, correct?
Well, I think it's a good indication of office space at the tower.
This was a space that was taken in the shell rate. The tenant himself actually put the
Do we know that? I don't have any information on that.
hydro wouldn't be put in equipment.
I think you're wrong on that.
You are the owner, you should verify that and have you verify that, but the.
I could, like, I'll go through the
Okay,
lease.
typical
I don't think
is,
they would just
typical is you lease it at Shell and the dentist comes and puts in their own equipment. It's a specialized field. So I don't think that's a reflection of market. At $15 or $16 is what it is, but also you indicated that you had an issue with taking rent that is old. You're taking rent that is from 2010, correct? And use it.
Yeah, it was negotiated in 2010, stepped up in 2016, expired in 2020.
So it's okay again for you and Altus in this case to use this, but not for
No,
consistent
no.
use.
I'm using this as one piece of evidence in our analysis. Again, my market rent that I've applied is higher than that.
Well, you would agree, I mean, it's quite clear it's a dental office. It's not an office space.
Dental, yeah, well, I mean, it has a higher degree of plumbing and electrical, which is landlord work, Mr. Paul. That would be done by the owner.
That's
It's
all.
the equipment that the tenant would put in.
That's all your questions?
That's it, that's it.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre, any questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
Mr. Mann, any questions?
Just with respect to lease comparables on your page 11, I'm looking at the number 11, Portage Avenue. 1066, total leasable area, $7.67. Where on Portage Avenue is that?
That's actually also in Portage Place, but it's not on the main. The two that the city had were on the second level. That's kind of the main retail section. And this is, I believe, is on the third floor, so it commands lower rents.
Okay. And these are all medical, chiropractic or dental?
Yeah,
offices?
I could read them out one moment too.
I don't need to know individually.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
fair enough, thank you.
Thank you. And my question relates to that as well. Just your St. Mary Avenue, most of your comparables are there. Are these on the Skywalk or what? Like you've got main, upper, I guess the main floor ones wouldn't be in the Skywalk. Are the upper floor ones in the Skywalks, or do you know?
No, the ones that, these are all in 400 St. Mary. And the first one is a dental group on the main floor. And then we have a dental group on the third floor, two doctor's offices on the third floor. And the last is another doctor's office on the third floor. And it's 301, 305, 303, 306.
Okay, all right. Thank you. That's all my questions. So now, is there any need for summation, gentlemen?
No, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, thank you. That concludes that item. So we'll move on to item number 2 on the docket, which the roll number ends in 100. And Mr. Pohl, you can proceed when you're ready.
So, file number 22, 585, roll number is 1209769210. It's for unit 105 for 360 Portage. The 2023 assessment is for $1,927,000. The leasable area is approximately 5,500 square feet. On page 8, pictures. It is for Rudy's Zinc Restaurant, as you can see on page 9. On page 10 is the INE. As indicated, that's what the leasable area is, 5,502 square feet. They include 2 park installs for the tenants, and they charge at $175 a stall. You can see the lease rate, which is on page 10. Again, I don't know why they're doing this. They're not gross or semi-gross, they're net, but they seem to be indicating the opposite way. So I don't know why, but I don't think there's any contention in that. So the COVID forms are on the next couple pages. Obviously, this was closed. It was all restaurants were closed at the time, and it was impacted. So on page 14 are some follow-up INEs, and I did this because they're reporting one way, now they're reporting a different way. And as you can see highlighted on page 14, it is a net rent, and then they're also reporting a percentage rent as it is a restaurant. That would also affect it as well. So I went through my due diligence and we went through it. There's actually a lease in place that they give us. It's attached on page 16. As it's indicated on page 20, it is a net lease. And then if you follow it further on page 23, indicates there's minimum rents. Well, so on the next page is over. On page 24 is going on to the following years in 2015 for the INE, which they submitted, which again has a different reporting. As you can see on page 26, you see that Rudy's is in at $135,050 a square foot for an annual net rent. So, and then if you look at the next page over as well, you see their costs that they have as well. So, with all things being equal, we're looking at the comparables that we're going to look at, which are on that page 3. So Rudy's Eat and Drink is there. You see that I've looked at for the downtown shed district, and as well as the just downtown general outside of the shed district, what rents are in place. and the years that they're associated with. So you can see highlighted in yellow, Rudy's kind of tails off, and how they're indicated at $10.50 rent. And now it's it doesn't make sense, so I don't think that's appropriate. I think they're reporting that wrong. But as you can see from the marketplace, these are the rents that are in place, and we have waited for the 60,000 square feet. We have an average rent of approximately $25.91 a square foot, weighted average of $25.15 a square foot, and a median of $24 a square foot. And if we look at side of the shed district, you can see that we have for 40,000 square feet, we have $23.75 a square foot for an average weighted average of $23.54 and a median of $24. So pretty much the same. You're looking at around 100,000 or so square feet. You're looking at the majority of the downtown for as far as upper end restaurants. You see that it's at 311 Portage, which again is right across the street. Newer building, newer OFA. They have 3 tenants in there as well. 260 Hargrave is Tavern United. A bit older, but still relatively new for the stock in downtown. 330 St. Mary's is Shark Club, obviously newer. And then Boston Pizza, and then Marcello's Market, which is also a 360 Main. So, and then again, you can read the outside of the shed district, the rents that are there. So when we go and we look at this building, or this particular series in this building, we have a rent applied at $25.79 a square foot. Overall, I think that's reasonable. I don't think there needs to be a difference from the mall rent versus what we see in the marketplace. And our standard parameters we discussed today apply. We have $897 for PGI at our 10% per vacancy, and expenses for 3% shortfall at $15 gives us a net operating income of $150,623, capped at 6% gives us $1,947,000. So when we're looking at the marketplace, $25 seems to be right in line. What we're seeing in place looks to be about a $22 rent, but also they're paying percentage rent on top of that, what it indicates on the INEs. And then when you look at said that they had a net rent of $135,000, it seems right on the market. So I think the assessment at $1,927,000 is reasonable.
Thank you. Mr. Slaughter, any questions?
So sorry, the last comment you made, the 135,000, you do understand that that is gross, right? You said that you understand this is a net rent, and they just reported all of the.
I indicated in all the years, they are indicating. We start on a page, I can go through again and be like. On page 10, they take it off as gross, and then.
Just 1 second, Mr. Cole. Madam Chair is just disconnected. Oh, she's better.
Oh, no, I was just was closing the blinds and I didn't want to get up while you were talking. I'm listening.
Okay. So what I've indicated is accurate towards what they were putting up. So clearly they're checking net. And if you look on page 14, they're literally checking yes to net. And we've worked out the rent rate for it. I've done it in an analysis of the rents that you see.
Sorry, what is the calculation of the net rent then?
Well, on page 14, they're indicating it's net.
Yeah, and what's that calculation? That's.
I already have it on the analysis here. Just give me a second. I can do it on that. I need one. This works. This page indicates 12.
Thanks, Mr. Bly. You mentioned something at the end that made me think that we were talking about two different lands, but yeah, okay. So $12 a square foot, but we are ignoring that and.
No, what I'm saying is we're reporting all the way through it. It's a little different as you can see from the 3 years that they're reporting right here. So when we're looking at it, when they're checking net. Right? So we see that the additional rent is also indicating a percentage of the rent of the gross sales, right? So that would be indicating additional income.
They have a clause for percentage, maybe I'll leave that for direct. I just wanted to make sure that what you said at the end was the net rent, which it is, that's.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
So the minimum rent that they have to put in is $10.50, but again, when you look at the analysis of what they're reporting, it's not quite the same, so.
Okay. But instead of the actual rent, which is considerably less than these, we veered to market instead, right?
Well, I'm looking at what the marketplace is, but I'm also looking at the marketplace of the building itself, so. If I'm seeing a rent of $12 or $10, that's heavy suspicion right there. That's not a market rent for downtown.
Did you confirm with the owner at all if that was an arm's length? So the rent comparison.
No, arm's length, no, I never, I mean, grocers or net.
That is an arm's length.
I assume it's an arm's.
Yeah.
So I don't think Hydro is operating this.
Page 3, you have some comparisons then. The first 3, these are located directly across from the True North Arena, correct? Right across the street.
Yeah.
And the next 1, 2, 3, Tavern, United, Shark Club, and Boston Pizza, these are all connected to the walkways within very close proximity to.
Yeah, they're short rents.
Yeah. And the subject property, would you be able to reach the arena from the subject property for a hockey game?
Well, obviously, it's not, you have to walk across the street, same as Brown's.
Yeah,
Same.
two blocks.
Yeah, so you still have to walk across the street.
Okay. I think that's all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mann, any questions?
Just one with respect to the photos that you have, page 9.
Yeah.
That patio area, is that part of the square footage or is that part of the leased area? What can you tell me?
I would assume that it would be heated area only, and the patio would be left out.
Okay,
I didn't verify that.
okay. Thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions, thank you.
And I have no questions, so Mr. Slaughter, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So again, I'll keep this very brief. It's Rudy's. They're located on the south end of the tower, facing Graham on the main level. They have access to the patio as well, to the last question asked. Our analysis is, I mean, this is just part of the hydro tower. So everything that we're talking about here is consistent with what we described before, where we're applying a slightly lower shortfall, but we ask for the non-recovered allowance or the increased capitalization rate. Otherwise, it's the market rent, which we have a slightly different opinion on. So on page 11, Madam Chair, we start with the actual rent in place. As I mentioned before, an actual rent is usually the best indicator of the market rent for a space if it's arm's length, et cetera, et cetera. It passes all the tests, which this does, but it is low. And so I had examined the lease and talked to the owners about this when we first started working on the building. It's $10.50 per annum for 10 years. That's what they pay net. They have a percentage rent clause that allows them to pay 3% of the gross sales over 1.5 million. And when I was there again on Wednesday to confirm a few items, Hydro was of the opinion, they said, I don't think they've ever met the percentage rent clause. And I said, well, actually, the city has an evidence 1 year where they did, and it equated to about $3,000 extra. And he said, yeah, but it's not much. Otherwise, they never meet their sales clause. So it ends up being a $10.50 per square foot net rent. And that's what they pay. They have a cap on their CAM at $12.50 a square foot. The CAM is less than that, so it's not a concern. You know, at times when a rent is high, it seems like that's fine to be using it as market rent, but when rent is low, it's got to be questioned. I admit you have to question when something looks out of the norm, which I've done. If it is arm's length, it is what it is. I still, though, feel that we look to market for this rent. But keep it in the back of our mind that there's something about this space that isn't allowing it to compete, even from the sales figures, with the other Shed District restaurants. So we've got 22 comparisons of downtown restaurants on page 11. And I won't go through everyone. They range, they can be as high as the one that Mr. Bull had in evidence at Brown's Social House right across from the arena. That would be at the highest end, and they can go as low as, well, subject at 10.50 or in the low teens. The average is $21.26. Median is $20.84. So in keeping in mind that there's an actual rent in place that probably reflects a lot of the considerations for this unit, but we looked at the market as well. I don't think we should veer to the high end. The average seems to be a more appropriate place to land. So we use $21 a square foot. It's also in keeping with one of the other rents in the building, which we'll talk about likely in about half an hour, which was Marcello's at $22 a square foot. The third restaurant is a smaller unit, which is at a higher rent. So Rudy's being the largest of the three, I think $21 makes complete sense, notwithstanding the fact that that's not what they're getting and they can't get that. So we use $21 with all the other rates as described, and the concluding value on page 15, Madam Chair, is $1,483,000. I don't think there's anything else we need to go through. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Poole. Any questions?
Other than would not having a patio not be more desirable, increase sales. Patio, you sit outside during the summer, it's added.
Yeah, I can give my opinion on how valuable a patio should be, but I can also state that when I look at actual transactions such as the subjects, it doesn't seem to be having a factor. So I think there's other, what was described to me actually, Mr. Poole, was the fact that they can't access through the walkways because they close at 6 o'clock at the hydro tower. That has been a concern for Rudy's as a tenant, to have patrons attending the games, because that's really why you're in the shed district at this point.
So obviously with the COVID, there's no way they would ever reach sales. They probably weren't even open, right?
Oh, it's been since they opened. They haven't reached it. I think that 1 year was the only one.
All right, that's the only questions I have.
Thank you, Mr. McIntyre.
I have no questions, thank you.
Mr. Mann, any questions?
No, none, thank you.
And I do not either. So thank you, gentlemen. So let's now move on to item number 3 on the docket. And the roll number ends in 000. And Mr. Poole, please proceed when you're ready.
Roll number is 12097692,000. It's unit 104 360 Portage. 2023 says values of 546,000. We have leasable area of 1,410 square feet. Again, within the hydro building. Turn to page 8. Display oven. I'm just looking to see online if they're still there. I was trying to do my due diligence on this. I believe they are still there.
These ones are.
Okay, all right. So as of June of 2019, indicates that display of it is there, but it doesn't show up on their website. So is this a little, are they actually there? So the reason why I had is because they don't actually list the tenant as you go through the years. So they do at one point, but not on another point. So again, same idea. Page 10 is the reporting of their INE. 2020, they indicate gross. And then they check out as gross, and then appears to be a gross rent of $27.50. But again, then they check out net on the year before. So I'm only as good as what's being held up to this. So when I'm looking at fully recovered and they're literally writing it in, or they're writing it in net and they're checking out net, which one is it? That's why I brought in the lease, the former one. This I don't have access to the lease, but I do have access to what they provided on a 2015, 2016 year basis, and it's what you see in place. So apparently it's $12,925. So and the cost on the other end of it about $1,635. So with that, I can't imagine this being gross. It looks like it's net, it feels like it's net, and then whoever took over the filling out the INEs just simply started checking gross. So at least that from my perspective, the agents, the owner's agent can answer them. If there's information to that. So On page 3 is the same comparables. As you see, Clay Oven was at, and that's one of the other things that I was looking at. Clay Oven was also at Portage, one Portage, and we were at $18.75. So when I'm looking at Clay Oven in 316 Portage, I was concerned with whether they're actually there. But they are there, and that was confirmed. So again, it's the same comparables that we're using. So more detail as we really just did. So now we have about $28.34 put onto the area. Again, it's the smallest square foot area. Restaurant here is typically you can make that call on economies of scale location because there's so many of them and they're roughly within the same range. When you're looking at office towers that are 500,000, 300, like there just isn't, just can't make that analysis. So when we're looking at a $28.34 a square foot rate, I think that's reasonable, given what they held up to us for the INEs. Should be further follow up from the agent. But with all the same parameters applied, we get a net operating income of $32,769 capped at 6%, which gives us back to our $546,000. With that, I am open to questions.
Okay, Mr. Slaughter, any questions?
No questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mann, any questions?
No, I don't, thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. Thank you. So, Mr. Slaughter, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Fairly straight ahead, Clay Oven is located at the other corner, a much smaller unit, but the other corner of the south end of the tower, Edmonton corner. So about a third of the size, I think, of Ruby's. They came in 2014. There are two things I should mention about all of the main floor tenants in this building. And one is, I think it explains some of the confusion around the rents. It is a net rent. There's some caps upon what they'll pay in additional rent, but it is net. But all of these locations have not done very well in the tower, not just in the pandemic, before that. And there was a period through the mid-2010s where Hydro wasn't charging full or any CAM to some of the tenants. And I think that's probably why who filled out the form maybe put gross. But it's supposed to be a net. And it's still in place as of the reference date, although they were closed at that time, but that's not the point of evaluation. And so here's another example where, you know, do I think that's at market? I think it might be a little high actually, because they've been struggling and they had to have assistance on their CAM and tax along the way. The second point is, again, what I've said earlier today, and it pertains especially to downtown retail and restaurants or service, is that the world in April 21 is very different than the world in 18. And I don't just mean the world at April 21 in the middle of the pandemic. I mean the world as people would see it likely into the future. There's going to be less people in the Hydro Tower, which dramatically affects these units. So I think if anything, you know, one might say that rents signed in 2014 might not be indicative at this point. Notwithstanding that, for the purpose of this analysis, we're using the contract rent, it's $2,750, very close actually to the city. So in this case, we're very close. So really the difference now is in that non-recovered expense item or the cap rate, whichever way, depending on the board wishes to go. But the risk, whether we recognize it in the NOI or in the cap rate, I think is real and needs to be counted in some fashion in this valuation. So in conclusion, Madam Chair, I'm asking the board to consider a slightly revised value of $580,000.
Thank you. Mr. Poole, any questions?
No question.
Mr. Mann, any questions?
I don't, thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
And I have no questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. Thank you. So we are now moving on to item number 4 on the agenda, which ends in roll number 300. And Mr. Poole, please proceed when you're ready.
Roll number is 12097692 It is 360 Portage. I don't believe it had the unit number on it, but that is the roll number. The 2023 assessment is for $1,054,000. The leasable area of this restaurant is 3,422 square feet. If we go to page 8, Marcello's Market and Deli. been in this, been in all these, restaurants, so if we go, to page 9. Again, same line of person filling this out, in 2020 year, they fill it out as gross. You look on the following page. I have confirmed through the case management process for the municipal board, we had it under appeal, not obviously through the office, but through the owner, through the restaurateur. It was $22, gross or semi-gross. It was a difficult, process that the gentleman was representing that. But it was determined that it was a $22 square foot net rent. So if we go through on the following pages, we see that page 11 and 12 is the COVID questionnaire. Page 13, similar to what I've done on the other CRUs that we've looked at. They then check it off as net, highlighted in yellow for your convenience. Net, and yes to net again. And if you look on page 14, you see the actual lease rates that are in place highlighted in yellow on the third. 5 years at $20 a square foot. And then $22 for the remaining years. So that's what was reflective of it. In 3 buildings, the rest of the lease, if you like. Same idea on page 18 and 19 as well as what we're reporting. So lease in place appears to be $22. It was converted to $22. If you look at the comparables, exactly what we have it in at, and with the comparables aligned. Then we go through page 4, the actual predicted at $22.88 a square foot. I think it's quite accurate. Same set of parameters apply as we've already discussed at nausea today. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Capped at 6%, the NOI is $63,280 and gives us our capitalized value at $1,054,000. With that, I'm open to questions.
Thank you. Mr. Slaughter, any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions, thank you.
Mr. Mann, any questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
Okay, and I don't either. So Mr. Slaughter, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, page 11 is really the main page at this point. Actual rent in place for this unit, it has now expired and the unit is vacant. But it was $22. That was a stepped up rent. Again, when I talk about the rent in place, I'm referring to the stepped up rent here. So it's $22. So we then say, okay, let's go back to market and take a look. It's the same comparisons that we looked at, many of the same with the city, but we have a few more here. And again, that average was $21.28. So all things considered and knowing the difficulty in these spaces in the property, I just revered back to the 22, not because it's contract, but because it seems to make sense in market. So we apply $22 a square foot rent, and we have no other contentions. We have a slightly lower shortfall, the higher non-recovered, and with the higher non-recovered, we'd accept a cap rate of 6. So our value on page 15, Madam Chair, is slightly lower than the city at $970,000.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Poole, any questions?
No.
No? Okay. Mr. Mann, any questions?
No, thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. Thank you. Okay. So we've done number 5 already, so we're going to move down to number 6 on the docket, which ends in a roll number of 900. And Mr. Poole, please proceed when you're ready.
Bear with me for 1 second.
Sure.
Which file is this?
Number 589.
9.
Which is 1900.
Okay, you didn't skip one, did we? 586.
No.
Wait, well, that's right. 586 was okay, but I just had a favorite that one. Okay, now that I got the right file. File number 22589. Unit 102, 360 Portage. 2023 assessment is for 897,000. So this is not a what we're dealing with as far as restaurants. This is just a space that's going to be more business related. So it is a 3,108 square foot space. The hydro tower right up is the one we already went through on the next page. We see on page 13, this is one of their tenanted spaces, but it is owner occupied. So to date, I don't have any more information other than hydro occupies it. It's in this Class A building. So literally the argument that we heard for the tower portion is the exact same argument I'm going to make here today. We're not going to have to go through the comparable market study that already have in place, as well as the TI and the cap that's already been covered in the other appeal. So when we go through here on page 9, for 3,108 square feet, we have $21.55 a square foot. Again, that's just simply the smallness of the space and the main. It's not up in the tower; it's on a concourse retail area. It's just a tenanted space that I guess they have become a tenant or they chose to occupy themselves. So exact same parameters that we've already discussed today. So your net operating income from that is $53,809, capped at 6%, gives us your $897,000. So,
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Slaughter, any questions?
and hydro occupies it still, or is it?
Well, yes. I don't think, so sorry, Mr. Paul, did you have rental comparisons for this?
It's just the same OFA study. And it's being used for their purpose within the real estate. It's obviously not up in the tower. It's a smaller space here in the concourse area. So you're going to naturally get maybe a little bit more there, but realistically, it's the same argument that we just made.
Okay, any questions? No further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Mann, any questions?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions. Thank you.
And I have none. So Mr. Slaughter, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the best thing to do is start on page 6 and 7 because there's some photographs of the space. So it's on the main level. It's kind of halfway down the building on Edmonton. And you can kind of see it on page 6, but closer on page 7. And then there's an interior photo at the bottom of page 7. It's an odd space. It comes off of the Galleria, and it's got common area, washrooms, and hallways. It's just kind of about not quite half the space. It's just kind of this common area, and then the main leasable area is this part of the front, where they were using it for bill payment. So hydro customers could come there and pay their bills, and they found that it just really wasn't worthwhile. Most of that's online. So they ended up shutting it down. And so now it's vacant space. So when we look at this on the market, main floor space typically would command higher if it's restaurants, banks, sort of finished spaces for a specific purpose. When it just comes to just kind of standard commercial space, we don't really see that escalation. And we see that in some of the rents being paid in the subject property as well. So we look on page 12 to a number of downtown main floor, non-restaurant, bank, etc., sort of just standard space, office or retail. And there's a combination here in various areas of downtown. I would ask the board, looking back at my comparisons, number 8 and 9 are actually outside of the core. So I'd eliminate those and would change my average from 1436 to 1478. But otherwise, the point being is this wouldn't command as much as the office in my mind, this type of space on Edmonton where it's located. And so we've applied $16 a square foot. It sits vacant today. The owner is not sure how they're going to approach it for the future. Otherwise, I have no contentions with any of the rates. Again, we ask for the non-recovered or the higher cap rate. And on page 16, we have a value of 621,000.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Pohl, any questions?
Not really, pretty much accurately described it. But typically main floor rates do go for higher, than the remainder. This is, I mean, you have your bank in one space, will come up to a minute of, they're paying 30 obviously for a bank space. Restaurants are that 20 to, low end for the kind of $20 to $28 range. So now we're at around $14 to $13 range for your.
Yeah, that's right. And I find that when we look at main floor space, if it is a restaurant, bank, or any of those type of spaces which has been fitted up for their specific purpose, you do see the higher rents. But when we look at just standard kind of, a retail or an office, I don't really see the demand as much for this.
Just because of the nature of the use of the property, for the, is obviously designed for the property owner, and that small segment of needing people paying a bill in person wasn't there, so they just shut it down.
Yeah, actually, originally they tried to lease this, but there's no interest. Then they put the bill payment center in, and they found, especially since the pandemic, there's just no point. So
You touched base on trying to lease it. What were the asking rates?
I don't know. I know for the office on the second and third floor that I mentioned when the dental design went in, they're asking around the higher teens, like 17.
All right, that's all the questions I have.
And please don't quote me on that. That was just a recollection.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mann, any questions for Mr. Slaughter?
No, I don't, thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions, thank you.
Yeah, and I do not either. So thank you very much. So now we're going to move on to item number 7, which is file number 22-588, and then the roll ends in 200. So when you're ready, Mr. Pohl.
Roll number is 1209769200. The address is 107 360 Portage. The 2023 settlement is for $1,061,000. The leasable area is 3,726 square feet. Here. The same idea as what we just heard. It's another tenant area within the building. Let me floor. So if you look on page 13, they indicate that it's simply owner occupied. So the rest of the analysis from that point, again, we've already covered as far as cap rate, direct inducement, and market analysis. We don't need to get into because we've already done that. Subject property description is in brief. We don't need to get into it full now on pages 3 to 8. And on page 9, again, for the 3,726 square feet, we have $20 million and 28 cents a square foot. Same standard parameters that we've already discussed multiple times today. Produces a net operating income of $63,630, capped at 6%, gives us our $1,065,000.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Mr. Slaughter, any questions?
No questions.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions, thank you.
Mr. Mann, any questions?
What floor is this on? Is this the main floor or is this, or you said that? Okay. Awesome. Thank you. No, that's my only question. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have no questions. So Mr. Slaughter, please proceed.
Thank you. Very simply, and unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the interior of the space. I thought I did at the time, but what this space is at the southeast corner of the building. The space actually starts kind of from the Galleria, and it's really a bunch of long hallways. They just kind of stretch out, winding in between what is Rudy's and some of the storage areas, and it ends up in the corner of the building where security office is. It's leftover space. I mean, if this was to Mr. Pohl's point, really, should this not be part of the roll number? And if it was, I would probably not be arguing much of an enhanced value from the space. It's just left over, can't access it from the outside, used as a security office. So I applied the same analysis, Madam Chair, as I did for the bill payment center, but I did use a slightly lower rent in this case on page 11. From the same market rent comparisons, I conclude that this would be on the lower end. I used $14 a square foot. Everything else the same as I've been discussing all day. So as page 15, I have a slightly reduced value of 641,000 rounded. And again, honestly, if this was part of the building, I wouldn't be adding 641,000. This is just necessary for the operations.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Pohl, any questions?
Questions?
Mr. McIntyre,
I have no questions, thank you.
Mr. Mann,
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
and I do not either. So the next item, number 8 on the docket, has been withdrawn. So we will move now to number 9, which is file number 3622, and the roll number ends in 1800. Mr. Pohl, please proceed when you're ready.
File number, roll number is 12097691 unit 101. The 2023 assessment is for $3,729,000. The leasable area is approximately 8,592 square feet. We turn over to page 14. Page 14, it shows this rural living bank space. Same problems that exist on the other IDs where now through similar growths. We'll go through it. COVID form is on 16 and 17. On page 18, the IE indicates that it's a $30 net lease, triple net, fully recovered, checked off as net. I don't think there's any contention on that. So as you can see, that's simply what they're reporting. And then same idea as the other years for the other properties, commercial rental units within this property. You see what they're paying on page 20, 267,000 for 2015 to 2016, and then associated costs on the next page at around $960. So we don't need to get into the capitalization rate as we already did. I do have a study put in place attached to this as well, but realistically, I think it's fairly reasonable where it's assessed. Just give me a second here. I back that up on page 9 with actual bank rates. Again, it's a bank space, but it isn't very prominent all day, obviously. Item tower.
Sorry, can I interrupt for one? Just, I'm having trouble following. Are we on item 8 or item 9?
8. Or sorry, we would.
Yeah, I think what's happened is Mr. Pohl had his full brief was attached to number 8. And then he had a shorter brief for 9. So I think he's using that.
Right.
One,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. I'll go back and forth.
One was with the realty, the owner, and one was with the tenant. So I have 2 file numbers and I produced one brief, but I just attached it.
There's notes on both, but I'm trying to go back and forth here. So thank you. That clarifies
me a little bit too.
Thank you.
Okay, so on page 9 of I guess the final 22,590, which is the same as
right
3622. You see the bank rates that are in place. So we took bank rates that are outside downtown, 17 comparables. We have around an average of 2688, a square foot, and medium 27, and a weighted average of 2590. We see for downtown, again, average of 2479, $27 for a median, and a weighted average of 2489. Again, there isn't a lot of CRUs for bank spaces leasing up in the appropriate years next to the reference date for there's only so many spaces, right? So they're long-term tenancies. It is what it is. So that's why we went outside of the downtown, just to have a feel for the marketplace as well as downtown itself. So when we get back to the actual rents in place, the model predicted a $31.55 square foot rate. So the standard parameters attached to that as well. They will be net operating income is 222,763 and capped at 6% is 37 or 3,729,000 rounded. So with that, I think it's reasonable. I think it should be at a $30 or $30 considering that the location of the building is without more questions.
I don't think I got anything past page 8.
Look on the one that was drawn. I didn't know which one was one, so I did produce the board. Oh, let me check. File number 590.
That might not have been saved. Do you mind if I just get yours?
Yeah, it's essentially the same argument that we.
Yeah.
I think there's some confusion on the two different appeals on the same.
It's all the same. I would say all the same.
Just the bank space is different.
Let's take a picture of this.
You didn't get it, I submitted it.
It's not in that, but we might have only saved one of the two. We probably
I can
saved.
send you again if you want.
Yeah, if you
Oh,
could.
so, okay, so it's just not in your actual file, Mr. Slaughter, but everyone else has it, correct?
Okay,
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good, all right.
okay, so I'm just looking at the rent comps. And,
Good. I wasn't sure if no one seen it.
So, which one you need, Mr. Slaughter?
I guess the one that has more than 7 pages.
Okay. Okay, so 590, I believe.
Okay. So the questions, Madam Chair, I don't think I really have any. I'm just looking at the rents. It seems to be sitting at market.
Yeah, that's fine. Take your time to look at them. That's fine.
Essentially, it's the study and it's backed up by some bank rates outside downtown and then within downtown and cross-referenced against the actual sign lease for the sub.
Yeah, no, I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McIntyre, any questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
And Mr. Mann, any questions?
I don't have any. I eventually caught up.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I guess I clicked on the right one, maybe, but maybe an error as it turns out, but I ended up being on the right one. So, sorry, I would have clarified that for you. Okay, okay, good, as long as everybody was able to follow that. Okay, so Mr. Slaughter, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is, I think, the first tenant that
And
came
just to
in.
clarify, Rod, you only had one brief on this, correct? So we're all looking at the right one.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
correct.
okay, good, all right, good. Go ahead.
So on page 6, you can see the bank. It's on the main floor, right on Portage Avenue, corner of Portage and Edmonton. And they came in 2009. They were one of the first tenants in, and their lease lasted until recently with a renewal that they could exercise, which they did. And the rent, as it stands at the reference date, Madam Chair, was 3108 a square foot divided by the area. It's very, very close to what the city's using. It's also not out of line with market in my mind. Seems to make sense for a bank space. So we've used the actual rent in this case, and again, it's a rounding error difference from the city. The only real difference here is that question of recognizing the risks in either the non-recovered expense allowance or the capitalization rate of 625. In the analysis before you, I've elected to use the higher non-recovered and accept the cap rate. The value would be about the same either way, and that comes to $3,525,000.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Pohl, any questions?
No questions.
Mr. Mann, any questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
Mr. McIntyre, any questions?
And I have no questions, thank you.
Okay, any need for any final summation from either of you gentlemen?
Not really.
No, I don't think so.
No, okay. Well, that concludes all the items that we have on our docket for this afternoon. So the meeting is now adjourned, and I thank you both very much for all your due diligence. That was a long day of presenting, and we appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pretty amazing how fast it went at the end. It's great.
Yes, it was.